Right, well, I had a lot of questions here. I'm going to try to get through them all. If I've missed anybody, I apologise. Okay, let's get into it. So, naught, 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 naught asks, who the fuck you are, incel? Actually, I'm not an incel anymore. I have a girlfriend now, so things are looking up. There have been periods in my life where I have, I suppose, technically been an incel in the sense of involuntarily celibate. I have had periods in my life where I haven't been having sex, but I don't think I've ever been an incel in the sense that that term is used on the internet. There's a certain type of person who is not having sex, or at least a certain type of man who is not having sex, who has lots of rather problematic ideas about women and social interaction and so on. And I've never been like that, as far as I know. Yes, I mean, look, lots of guys go through periods where they can't get dates. I have been in that position, but things are looking good at the moment. And there have been lots of other times in my past when things have been. I've had plenty of weird, degenerate sex. Okay, so 99bit asks, what are your opinions on ultrafinitism? I think that, I mean, first of all, I don't really know a lot about it, but I find it hard to see the motivation. I mean, look, numbers in general, including the number 1 and the number 2, even the simplest numbers are sort of puzzling. They're puzzling enough, right? And I don't know, I just think if you accept that we can construct those numbers, if you take a constructivist account of those numbers, I don't really see what would be the problem with constructing infinite sets, or indeed very, very, very large numbers. I actually feel like ultrafinitists maybe aren't extreme enough, because look, I can picture, for instance, the number 3 in my head. Like I can close my eyes and imagine 3 things, and I can get 3 dots in my mind. In my mind's eye, I can have 3. But I can't picture 90 things. I can't do, once I get to I don't know, once I get to sort of 10, 11, 12 numbers like that, the pictures in my head just become sort of, a vague mass rather than sort of clearly delineated objects. So I actually feel maybe you should go the whole hog and say that really only numbers like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 exist, but beyond that beyond that there's nothing. Anyway, look, yeah, I don't really I don't really know much about ultrafinitism. It seems like it's difficult from an ultrafinitist point of view to account for a lot of mathematics that is very useful, and so I just don't yeah, that seems in other words, you're not going to have if you intend on pursuing an ultrafinitist program, that's going to cut you off from a lot of mathematics. And given that, I mean, look, I'm an anti-realist about mathematics. I'm a kind of constructivist about mathematics, but I would just treat it as a sort of useful tool. And why would you cut yourself off from something that is clearly serving as a useful tool? Anyway, yeah, so A. Pedra de Sisifo asks, what is the meaning of life? 1 second. Right, what is the meaning of life? Well, I suppose the question here is, what is meant by meaning? Do we mean... I usually would interpret this question as asking something like, what is the purpose of life? And on my on the line I'm inclined to take is that there are no objective purposes. I don't think that there's any sort of plan or goal for our life that is been given to us by God. I don't think there's any plan or goal that is in any sense written into the universe. People make their own purposes. People have their own goals. It is somewhat puzzling to me what would be involved in having a purpose of one's life, because I would usually think of purposes as being attached to things that you intentionally do. So like I perform certain actions, and then you can ask well, why did you do that? Like, what was the point of doing that action? And in that context, I can then say what my purpose or goal was. But life is just something that happens to you. You're just kind of born. It's not like I had any say in it; it just happened. So how could there be a purpose for it? I guess maybe the purpose of my life is so that my parents can enjoy raising a child. That was something they always wanted to do. That was why I was brought into existence. But that's not really a satisfying answer, right? That's not the sort of answer people are looking for when they ask the question, "What is the meaning of life?" But I think look, the meaning or purpose of your life is whatever you make it, and it's up to you. Okay. Ghosts asks, what strikes you as what strikes you are one of the best arguments against global skepticism? I tend to find skeptical or anti-realist arguments intuitive, and I'm worried that I have no good response against a sort of skeptical view that says we lack knowledge in nearly everything. Well, I mean, that I think the skeptic wins, right? Like, I think that skeptical arguments, insofar as they're targeting, justification, I think that they're convincing. My line is that beliefs just have no justification. So I'm happy to just go ahead and hold loads of beliefs, though. I don't think there's anything irrational about holding beliefs without justification. So in a sense, it's like, the sort of line I have is, well, yeah, sure, okay, the skeptic wins, so that means I have to, kind of radically reconceive what's going on in sort of epistemology and belief formation. But at the end of the day, I like holding beliefs, and, I like, why shouldn't I? Why not? Why shouldn't I hold beliefs? I mean, who's going to object to that? Is the skeptic going to object to me holding beliefs? Why would they? I think that the issue with arguments against global skepticism is that just in principle, I think you can see that global skepticism is going to be impossible to get any purchase on, right? I mean, what argument, even in principle, could work against a global skeptic? Well, think about how arguments function. I mean, an argument proceeds by offering premises in defense of a conclusion. That's what an argument is. You offer some reasons, you state some propositions that you hope both yourself and the interlocutor will accept, or at least maybe not even yourself, but at least just the interlocutor. You state some propositions that you hope they will accept, and then you try to show that those propositions justify or entail or lend support or whatever to a conclusion. Well, the issue is that a global skeptic is not going to accept any of the premises. They're not going to accept any of the that even if they did accept any of the premises, they're not going to accept that those premises have any justificatory power, that those premises can serve as evidential support or anything like that. There's nothing you can say, like, in principle, right? That whatever you say to them, they're not going to accept. So you're not going to be able to change their minds. So, I mean, look, the skeptic, I guess we can say, is sort of refusing to play the game of argument. And if somebody doesn't want to play the game, then, I mean, what can you do? How can you possibly win against someone who isn't playing the game? I don't know. I don't know how you deal with that. I mean, I guess you could just shoot them or something. Actually, that's a pretty common response historically to people who you disagree with. So I don't know. Maybe maybe that will work for you. But that's not really an argument, right? Also, I saw and enjoyed the abortion ethics dialogue between you and Nicole. Nicole, okay, it's Cole, just Cole. Have you thought about doing a series on the abortion debate? I'd love to have something to send my pro-life friends who aren't familiar with the literature to try and sway them. I have to say, it's not something that I have any plans to do. I'm not really that interested in ethics, and I'm not really that interested in getting into the arguments about abortion. I mean, I am very, very, very strongly pro-choice. So, but like for me, engaging with these arguments is it's purely sort of pragmatic. I don't get a lot of, it's not intellectually that engaging to me. I mean, the reason why I made that video was because I just wanted to have something out there that, you know, well, there were two reasons. First of all, it was content. Okay, it's content for the channel, and it was relevant to something that was happening at the time. So it was the sort of thing that might have got a lot of clicks. Okay, you know, and at the end of the day, I am pro-choice, and so I want to say something in defence of that. Like I do. If I can do a little bit to promote that position, then I guess I will, if it's easy for me to do so. But yeah, I mean, I'm not deeply interested in this, or really in ethics in general. I have actually, however, spoken to Cole, and we've thought about doing another video, but it wouldn't really be like my introductory videos. We thought about doing a kind of just, you know, angry rage video. But I don't know whether that's going to happen. Lastly, what's your preferred pronouns and gender identity? I don't care about pronouns. I have no preferred pronouns. As for my gender identity, as far as I can tell, I do not have one. I'm obviously aware of the fact that I will be classified as a male by basically everybody, and I'm fine with that. So I don't know. Is that maybe I guess that means I have a male gender identity? I don't really know what gender identity is, to be honest. I mean, I don't have a problem with people who do take themselves to have a gender identity. That's fine, but I just don't. I don't really get it. I don't really get it. Like I don't know what that is. So, and actually, I mean, the only reason why I present as male is laziness. You know, if I could be bothered, I would probably be much more androgynous or just sort of fluid. I think sometimes if I could be bothered, I would like make myself very, very well. I'd make myself a woman. Fuck it, I'll put it that way. Yeah, some days I would make myself a woman if I could be bothered. I can't be bothered. That's the thing. Yeah, I don't really think I actually have a gender identity, which, I mean, maybe, I guess if you're working with the sort of taxonomy that seems to be popular among among people who, you know, care about things like transliberation, then I guess maybe that makes me non-binary. Yeah, I actually don't care. I really don't care, personally. I mean, I'm just about myself, right? My pronouns and gender identity, I don't care. So, AC, what are some underrated and or overrated philosophers? You know, with respect to people being overrated, I generally just like philosophers, especially in the analytic tradition. I just like them, even when I disagree with them. I don't actually have the strong feeling that any of them are overrated. In fact, even philosophers in traditions that I'm not interested in, I don't really, yeah, I don't feel strongly about them. I don't feel like they're overrated. I mean, look, I know nothing really about Heidegger. I do know that when I read Heidegger, I hated it. I wanted to throw the book out the window. I couldn't understand any of it. It just seemed pointlessly incomprehensible. But do I think Heidegger's overrated? I mean, I don't know. I feel more like maybe I just haven't found the right way of reading him, perhaps. Maybe I haven't found the right path into him. I mean, look, honestly, G.E. Moore, I think, just sucks. I guess I have to say that Moore is overrated. His arguments are really bad. I think he's had a very bad influence on philosophy. The sort of resurgence of Morean arguments has been a disaster from my point of view. And I think it's you know, the resurgence of Morean arguments and the sort of defense of common sense is promoting attitudes which seem to me to just be at odds with the very point of doing philosophy. Like, I just feel that people who find that sort of view attractive, it feels to me like they just miss the point of what philosophy is all about, to be honest. And Moore was also an appallingly bad writer. I mean, like, actually, like, there are sometimes when you read his work, it comes across almost as like a parody. It's so bad, and so his ideas were shit, his writing was bad, and yet he was one of the main influencers on the analytic tradition. Also, Wittgenstein. I mean, Wittgenstein sucks. The Tractatus is, I mean, one of the worst things I've ever read. As far as I can tell, Wittgenstein was a total shithead as well. I don't understand. You know, I mean, because his work clearly sucked, and as a person, he was just awful. So it's a bit puzzling that he managed to become so influential. I do think that there's a lot of value in his later work, but a lot of that I feel has come from people responding to Wittgenstein. I'm not sure how much of the value in his later work should be attributed to Wittgenstein himself. So I guess maybe Wittgenstein is another one that I would say is overrated. But yeah, so what I said about not really having strong feelings and just generally liking all philosophers, I guess that was bullshit. And I do think some of them are overrated. As for underrated, you know, the one name that always comes to mind with this is Andrei Kukla. A lot of... It's not that anybody hates Andrei Kukla, it's just that nobody really seems to know about him or talk about him. And I don't know why, because his work is absolutely brilliant, it's incredibly rigorous, he always has really interesting and challenging arguments, and he talks about an incredible variety of topics which, you know, so some of the topics he talks about are, you know, classic philosophical topics, you know, the scientific realism debate, social constructionism, stuff like that. But he's also got topics on, you know, he's also got books on just like other areas that aren't so, you know, that aren't so popular, I suppose, or haven't been so thoroughly investigated, like extraterrestrials. He's got some fascinating stuff on, you know, whether or not we could communication with extraterrestrials, the possibility of communication with extraterrestrials. I really think he should have been more influential. So Andrei Kukla, I guess, would be the underrated one. Agit Utkan, what is your take on Kantian normative ethics? Can you talk about Kantian approaches in ethics broadly? I mean, I'm just not interested in it. I just don't care about it, to be honest. And I don't want to. I don't want to talk about it. I don't find it in. I just, man, like it's one of the things I just want to move on from. Just look, generally speaking, I don't really buy into like moral system building. As the older I get, the more ridiculous it seems to me. And so all of these like moral systems, you know, the Kantianism, utilitarianism, even virtue ethics. I mean, I guess virtue ethics actually, when it initially started, was sort of presented as being like a kind of anti-theoretical thing, which I guess is kind of cool. But no, all of them just seem absurd. And look, so with Kant specifically, I think the notion that moral principles are going to just follow from practical reason is totally absurd. I'm Humean. I think, you know, 'tis not contrary to reason to prefer the destruction of the world to the scratching of my finger. And I just look. I've communicated how I feel about it, all right, and so I'm going to move on. Akzhol Chadan, what are your thoughts on the modern issues that new generations may be facing now or in the future? I mean, things like lowered attention span, promiscuity, increasing laziness, and social isolation. Okay, so promiscuity is a wonderful thing, and so I don't think we have quite the same perspective on this. I think promiscuity is fantastic. I'm all in favour of people being promiscuous. Now, in fact, interestingly, there is an issue here, which is that promiscuity is declining. Promiscuity is, yeah, I mean, if you look at the data on this, I think it seems to be very clear that people are having fewer sexual partners. They're having less sex now. They are less sexually satisfied than they were, you know, in the past, and it seems, you know, with each passing year, it just seems to get worse and worse. And of course, that's probably connected to one of the other things you point out there: social isolation. Like everybody's fucking alone. Nobody seems to have like communities anymore, so nobody's forming connections with other people. So, you know, people aren't having sex. It really fucking sucks. As for laziness, I'm not sure I buy that people are lazy. I think you know, working hours. See, it's not clear how you like how you kind of quantify things like actual working hours. But the idea that like working hours are declining. I mean, maybe relative to like the early days of the Industrial Revolution, but historically, like over the whole sweep of human history, I believe, in fact, that I mean, I have read that it might be the case that people actually work longer hours now than they did in like the medieval period. That they have fewer days off and work longer hours than they did in the medieval period. I have read pieces to that effect, but I mean, again, it's very difficult to quantify what actually counts as like work, as labor. Yeah, I don't really buy that people are becoming increasingly lazy, and even if they were, good. I want people to be lazy. I don't. Why the fuck would you want to work? Like, what the fuck is that? Why would you want to do that? Like what? Like, work is awful. All right, we should be trying. That should be like the number one thing. I am, frankly, right. Like that. I am enraged by the fact that we developed all of this like technology, right? And as far as I'm concerned, the number one thing that we should have been doing with technology is liberating ourselves from work. Work fucking sucks. And it doesn't seem like we've really done that. You go back to like the 1920s and you can find people writing about the impact of technology, the expected impact of technology. And they talk about technology in very utopian terms, and one of the things they say about it is it's going to massively reduce the amount of work that people have to do. Maybe we'll get to a point where people are just working like 3 hours a week, and we like, and I feel like why not? It seems like we just like as a society kind of chose not to go down that path instead of going down the path of reducing labor, of like using our tools and our intelligence to reduce labor. We went down the path of increasing consumption. So increasing consumption means we're doing just as much, if not more labor, and we're wrecking the planet as well. It's fucking awful. So I want people to be lazy. I want people to be promiscuous. I think that we have a very different point of view on what the problems on this planet are. Alejandro Perea, would it be possible that nominalism and universals and anti-realism in philosophy of science could somehow be linked? Absolutely. It's absolutely linked. Actually, this is something that I mean, explicitly argue in my own PhD. I don't really use the language of nominalism and universals, but I certainly am operating within the, nominalist tradition, let's say. I do think, it seems to me that realists, I think, pretty much have to be committed to natural kinds in some sense. They have to be committed to the idea that scientific classifications are, carving nature at its joints, that they sort of latch on to the structure of the world. I take it that kinds, so I take just a global constructivist view of kinds, and that seems like a kind of anti-realism. So I think it's very directly linked. Yes. I also ask, where can we read your PhD thesis? Just email me. Send me an email. I'll send it to you. Alexandra G. Harper, what is your view on David Bowie? Favourite song, favourite album? Personally, I enjoy the sound of Station to Station. I was reading the question there. I wasn't endorsing Station to Station, although as it happens, I do really like Station to Station. I think that David Bowie was, I think he was a genius. I really like his music. I think that what I like about Bowie is that he was something of a musical chameleon. He was constantly trying new things, and he was almost always successful. I think that he generally nailed it. He would shift from one genre to another, try out all sorts of new things, and he always had very interesting contributions to make in those genres. My favourite album by Bowie, this is an easy one. It's easily my favourite, and I think it's woefully overlooked, is the album Earthling. Earthling is Bowie's foray into sort of drum and bass, and it is so damn good. I mean, the production of the album is incredible. Like, it just like the sound of it, it's just monstrous. Like it just sounds great, and it sounds big, and you know, it's got these incredible grooves, and it does lots of really like interesting experimental things. There's a song in it, "Looking for Satellites," which has one of my favorite guitar solos of all time. The guitar solo in that, which is, it's like this just sort of distorted kind of like it's like a noise. It's just this distorted noise which like gradually gets higher and higher. I love the whole thing. I love Earthling, and in general, I think that Bowie's '90s work is very overlooked. I also really like Buddha of Suburbia, Black Tie, White Noise, Hours. Yeah, more people should. Oh, and of course, Outside. Outside. How could I forget Outside? Yeah, Earthling, and Earthling's my favorite Bowie album. Outside is a contender for my second favorite, and I think more people should listen to more of Bowie's '90s work. Alexandra Lomashvili, Can You Fly? No, I can't. Almus Quotch. Somebody has probably already asked, but do you have a view on Benatar's antinatalism? Yeah, I mean, look, the way I look at this is, if everybody was to stop having kids, that would probably be quite bad for me. Probably, probably, because if everybody stopped having kids, I mean, how are we, like, as I get older, it looks like institutions are going to start collapsing, and that would really suck, right? It would probably be a good idea for fewer people to have kids, but obviously that's not antinatalism. Antinatalism says no more kids, just end the whole thing. Well, look, if you want to do that after I'm dead, then fine, whatever. But while I'm alive, I mean, yeah, no thanks. Because if everybody stopped having kids, then what you would end up with is like an aging population, and that would put more and more pressure on social services, which are already kind of being dismantled. You know, and so as I get older, you know, I might need some of those services. Look, so if I once I get to like 90 and I'm on the way out, then you can do the antinatalism thing. But I'm not going to promote it while I'm alive. Again, probably a good idea for fewer people to have kids, but that's as far as I'll go. Also, are you still in academia or looking for something else? No, I'm not in academia, and I don't know what to do with myself. I'm really screwed, to be honest. Arme, I've been reading philosophy for a while now, but I still seem not to have an appropriate understanding of it. I know nothing about some philosophers like Kant, Nietzsche, Deleuze. Yeah, I don't know nothing. I don't know anything about them either. So you know, I wouldn't worry about that. I wouldn't worry about not knowing anything about some philosophers. That's perfectly normal. I've done a philosophy PhD, and there are whole traditions of philosophy that I know basically nothing about. But you say you lack a kind of overview which connects these ideas together. How do you overcome that? I don't know, dude. You just have to keep reading more. Just read more, and in particular, read textbooks. They are invaluable. So what you want to do really is focus. I mean, if you want to get the sort of broad understanding of philosophy, then the thing you do is buy a textbook on the topic that you're interested in. Say, you know, metaphysics, right? There's plenty of introductions to metaphysics. So like, just go buy an introduction to metaphysics. And then maybe get hold of like an anthology or something. There's, again, plenty of anthologies of metaphysics, and that will contain a bunch of articles that sort of cover all of the main areas. And yeah, you know, like, read that in conjunction with the introduction. And so, I mean, that's what you have to do. But I wouldn't worry about not knowing things about philosophy, because philosophy is huge. Nobody has anywhere near enough time in their life to learn even 10% of it. Andreas Frostl, what is your metaphysics of social groups? Have you ever been into social ontology? What ontology would you suggest with regard to the social world? Yeah, I don't know. I've never gotten into that, so I'm not sure. I mean, look, I'm just a global constructivist about kinds. I think I had a video on it called how science constructs the world, and I have another video called The Language of Nature, where I express these views. So, even when look, I'm a constructivist about, water and gold and mitochondria, right? Like, and species. So it seems like I kind of natural to be a constructivist about social groups and things like money and governments and institutions as well. I'm not sure whether that's really I mean, I don't know. Is that an ontology though? Because so from my point of view, there are multiple ways of carving up the world, and it's sort of up to us. It's dependent on what our goals and interests are. And so it's not like there's some single ontology that falls out of that. There's going to be a plurality of different ontologies, and there's no privileged ontology. I guess that's my line on ontology in general, right? So that would be I'd just say the same thing about social groups and social entities. What's your opinion on easy ontology as proposed by Amy Thomason? Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not really deeply familiar with Thomason's views on this, but I take it that this is the idea that, as I understand it, the thought is that we can answer ontological questions about what exists, with just kind of conceptual truths, I guess, just rules about how words are used, plus empirical facts. My own view on concepts, I'm not sure if my view on concepts would be compatible with this, because I'm not sure I really believe that there are conceptual truths. I'm quite skeptical of things like the analytic synthetic distinction. The line that I tend to take on concepts is that concepts sort of don't have extensions. So for example, as a toy example, let's say that that we have observed loads and loads of swans, and that we've found all of the swans that we've observed to be white, right? And then one day somebody goes to some other country and they observe a bird that has a lot of swan-like characteristics, but that is black. Well, now the question is, okay, is this a black swan? Have we discovered a black swan? What I would say is that there's not really any facts in the matter about that. So you can take the term swan to be just defined such that swans are white. Like, you can take whiteness to be one of the defining properties of swans, or you could not. I mean, and I don't think there's any fact of the matter about what the correct way to use that concept is. And certainly in the toy example that we're imagining here, where we have a society of people where for hundreds and hundreds of years, they've observed loads of swans. It may well just be indeterminate. It's indeterminate whether whiteness is part of the definition of swan, whether that's part of the concept swan. I think that concepts are indeterminate, are vague, and so there's a decision that is made. It's ultimately a decision whether we count this new bird as a swan, and so we say that some swans are black, or whether we just say, okay, well, it's black, so by definition it's not a swan. And again, that's a toy example, but the point is that there's this idea which I think is common in philosophy, which is that concepts divide the world in some sense determinately. Like there's a fact of the matter to which things concepts apply. The concept swan picks out these things as swans and these things as non-swans, and then we go out into the world and we discover to which things the concept applies. I don't really see it that way. I think it's just indeterminate, and it's a product of ultimately social negotiation whether the concept applies to new things that we find. So that kind of perspective raises problems for the notion of conceptual truth. The other thing I would say about, again, maybe that's compatible with some of the things Thomason says, but the other thing I would say about easy ontology is, look, ontology, if ontology is easy, then it's probably going to be uninteresting. And I think that even if ontology is easy, so if you take a perspective on ontology where ontology becomes easy, I think what's going to happen is that there will be related questions which become more important. So like, let's say, for example, that let's grant that numbers exist. And maybe you can show that numbers exist, and this is an easy matter. It's an easy matter to show that numbers exist. You just say, well, look, we have these these rules for using certain terms. Like, I say there are 4 lights, which means the number of lights is 4, which means the number 4 exists. Well, I think that that's fine, but then that just raises the question of, well, what exactly are numbers? Are they Platonic entities? Are they structures? Are they fictions? I mean, obviously we can say that fictional entities exist, so maybe numbers are still fictions, So I don't know. It seems like all of these standard metaphysical questions remain open. The question of you can deflate the question of whether or not X exists, but then the question of, well, what exactly is X becomes like more substantive. All of the sort of substantive things that we thought were associated with the question of whether X exists get shifted onto this question of, well, what exactly is X? I don't know if that makes sense. And again, I'm not actually deeply familiar with her work, so maybe maybe I'm just completely missing the point here. Okay, what is your take on the sometimes voiced accusation that analytic philosophers are oblivious to history? What is your take on the importance of history, of philosophy, for current debates? Yeah, I don't, look, sometimes history matters, sometimes it doesn't. I think that the sorts of questions dealt with by analytic philosophers are often not really that important. Like, it doesn't really matter what the history of a concept was, or what the history of anything else was. Like, yeah, sometimes history is relevant, sometimes it isn't. I'm not at all convinced that that philosophers are illegitimately ignoring history. I mean, sometimes they do, but not in general. You also ask concerning my views on continental philosophy. You ask whether I have a feeling that most of this philosophy is just very bad, lazy argumentation in pseudo-intellectual disguise. I know that you commonly just answer questions of this kind by saying, I don't really do/know continental philosophy, but you must have some opinion. I guess you've heard me say stuff about this before then, because I don't really know continental philosophy. I don't do it, so I don't have an opinion. I don't know, man. I don't have an opinion. Why would I have an opinion on it? I don't do it. I don't know it. I think it's really weird to me that people are expected, and that people act as if they have like views on everything. I mean, look, there's lots of things I just don't know, and I just haven't really studied, and I haven't, I don't have anything informed or interesting to say about them. And I mean, continental philosophy is one of those things. Anonymous Cat. Do you feel that philosophy has deepened your understanding of the world, or merely exacerbated confusion and ambivalence? I mean, I don't feel like confused or ambivalent really about philosophy. Generally speaking, when I engage with philosophy, I understand the theories. Now, I do think that the trajectory of my philosophical development has been, I've become increasingly sort of skeptical, as it were. I started out as a scientific realist, and then I kind of shifted to a sort of constructive empiricist. I believe, I still thought that I knew facts about the observable world, but I was agnostic about theoretical claims concerning the unobservable. But then I've kind of shifted to a sort of constructivist view of objects in general. I'm much more sympathetic to just radical skepticism than I used to be. But I don't see this as like increasing my confusion. Confusion isn't the right sense. I just feel like my views have changed, and I'm quite happy with the position I'm in. Like, there's a lot of philosophers who seem to be really bothered by skepticism. You know, Hume was troubled by skepticism, and I'm not. I'm kind of okay with it. It just seems fine to me. So yeah, I don't think I'm confused, but I'm not sure it would be right to say that I've deepened my understanding of the world. I mean, I have a better understanding of arguments, concepts, theories, or at least I hope I do, than maybe I used to. And those arguments, concepts, and theories have given me like perspectives on the world. You know, there's like new perspectives on the world, and hopefully I can see things, I can see connections between things that maybe I couldn't see before I started doing philosophy. But yeah, it's not really understanding of the world, because I take it that like you know, I as I said, I'm much more sympathetic to various kinds of skepticism. So I guess that's in some ways you might think that my understanding of the world has reduced, or at least maybe I think it's not available. Okay, in either case, do you have any regrets about studying philosophy? None whatsoever. Aravind Appat, what is your personal philosophy of life? I don't have one. I don't really think about my own life. In philosophical terms, I tend to just do whatever I happen to enjoy in the moment, and that's it. I don't really think about it more deeply than that. Arka Mukhoty, is metaphysics impossible? Well, you know, I mean, depends on what we mean here. Is clearly people can do metaphysics. You know, I mean, metaphysics exists. It's a discipline. It's produced lots of interesting ideas and arguments. So I think it's worthwhile. I'm glad that there are people doing it. Now, does metaphysics get us to knowledge of the world? Well, look, I don't think so. I mean, first of all, because I'm just generally inclined to be an empiricist. I think that very often metaphysics is sort of off on the wrong track right from the start. But you know, look, I mean, you know, look, I don't know, man. I mean, I think I personally tend to resist the sort of explanation by postulation that metaphysicians engage in, but it's clearly possible to do that. And I mean, from other sort of epistemic perspectives, I guess you would say it is getting you knowledge of the world. I don't know. I mean, this is a difficult question to interpret. I'm not really sure what you mean by impossible here. So is the question like, do metaphysical arguments and theories provide justification? So like, do the arguments that metaphysicians produce provide justification for metaphysical theories? Well, I would say no, but then I don't think anything else does either. I don't think there is justification. I think that with respect to epistemic justification, skepticism wins. I don't think there is any epistemic justification for anything. So, you know, metaphysics is in no worse position than anything else with respect to justification. So, I mean, yeah, one thing that you're not going to get from metaphysics, I suppose, are the sort of, I don't know, practical. I mean, there's like, if you do science or something, then I guess you might be, you know, constructing technologies. You're not going to get that from metaphysics. But then you're not really going to get that from other types of philosophy either. So, so yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. Second, what is your take on epistemic relativism? Well, I guess my take on epistemic relativism is a big question. It's probably too big for this sort of context. I already have videos where I've defended relativism. I mean, like, I am an epistemic relativist. And I can say that I think many of the arguments against epistemic relativism are very bad. They're very bad because they seem to me to just be straightforward straw mans. A very common move that you will see people make is that they will try to saddle relativists with a kind of equal validity claim. So what people will very often do is they'll say, well, you know, look, if you're a relativist, if you're an epistemic relativist, then, you know, you think that like science is no more legitimate than voodoo. You know, like astronomy is no better off than astrology, and that's just, I mean, that's ridiculous. Relativists more than capable of making judgments about like making epistemic judgments. You know, a relativist can say that certain beliefs are reasonable or justified and certain other beliefs are not reasonable or justified. Nothing stops a relativist from doing that. Nothing stops a relativist from saying like this point of view is better than this other point of view. The key idea of relativism is that whether or not the truth of a proposition is relative to some perspective, and that there is no perspective independent means of judging different perspectives. That's the key idea. That's basically it. That's what relativism claims, right? Like, so whether or not a belief or proposition is true, that's dependent on one's perspective. And of course, there are lots of different ways of filling in what a perspective is. And then there is no, like, we can't step outside our perspectives. There's no perspective independent way of judging between different perspectives. But the thing is, like, we occupy perspectives. I occupy a particular perspective, and from the perspective that I occupy, I can make judgments about things that are true or false, things that are reasonable or unreasonable. I can do that. So can everyone else. I think relativism is often sort of saddled with, people try to saddle it with claims which I think it's not committed to, and once you get past that, it's a position which seems to me to be in, it has much more going for it than is often thought. I would take it would take too long. I mean, I can't go through everything, right? But I have a video, or I think it's called How Science Constructs the World. That kind of takes a relativist perspective. I've got a video called The Language of Nature. That takes a relativist perspective. I've got some videos on Nelson Goodman. Nelson Goodman was a relativist. Those are some things that I've produced, which I guess are sort of sympathetic to relativism. I suppose, look, okay, the fundamental claim is truth is relative to perspectives. There's no perspective independent way of judging different perspectives. That strikes me as just intuitively, like, I don't know, that seems very plausible to me. What else could truth be? Truth, I take it as a property of propositions, or maybe more broadly, models, theories, pictures even. And a proposition is true when it, appropriately matches in some sense the world. But we're the ones who state propositions. We have to construct the propositions, and we have to judge whether or not that matching takes place. I think relativism is attractive just from thinking broadly about the nature of truth, and I think that a lot of the arguments against relativism are quite poor. So that's my take. Arkadi Petrosyan, do you believe in determinism? Why yes or not? Well, no, because I don't believe that there are any modal properties. I just uploaded a video called There Are No Modal Properties. I don't think there are any modal properties, and so I don't believe in determinism, because determinism involves, so the claim of determinism is that given the certain initial conditions, there is no other way that the universe could develop. Given the initial conditions of the universe, it must be it must develop in some particular way. There is no other way things could have been. So this involves attributing a kind of metaphysical necessity to the development of the universe, and that's modality. So I guess, the video There Are No Modal Properties will hopefully explain a bit about that. Astra, what is the most ridiculous belief you have or are inclined to like? Well, I don't think any of my beliefs are ridiculous. Or maybe they are. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what counts as a ridiculous belief. If you look at the recent Phil Papers survey, the most unpopular beliefs that I hold are epistemic relativism and anti-realism about causality. So I say that causality is just non-existent, and those views are very unpopular. So maybe they're the most ridiculous ones, but I mean, I don't know. Like, I think they're perfectly reasonable. Aubrey Grossman, would you ever start an OnlyFans? Well, I don't actually have a problem with that. Yeah, I mean, in principle, I'd be fine doing that, but it's not just up to me, is it? I'm not the only person. Well, I guess it is. I guess it kind of is just up to me. Like, I could just do it by myself, but that wouldn't really be fun. If I was going to do it, I'd want to do it with someone else. I have no interest in just doing it alone. Like, at the end of the day, I mean, if somebody wants to see my dick pics, just my own pics, I mean, you can just ask me. I don't fucking care. Have them. I don't care if people see my dick. Like, why would that matter? Yeah, I mean, if I was starting an OnlyFans, then basically I'd be moving into amateur pornography, and I'd want to do that with somebody else, and it's not really up to me, is it? It has to be a mutual decision, and it's not like something I would object to. I mean, I'm keen on making money, and I'm sort of sexually open enough that I would be happy to consider this, but yeah, it's not something I really care about either. So it just doesn't. I don't really have them. It's not like I'm motivated to find somebody into that. So yeah, probably not going to start an OnlyFans, but I suppose I wouldn't rule it out in principle. Aurora Yuffie, what is your favourite argument against the existence of God? I don't know, actually. I really don't know. I don't. I just don't think about God really at all. I mean, except in this sort of context, I will. But it just isn't. It just isn't really an issue that is on my mind much. I've never been given a convincing reason to believe that there could be a God. Maybe, you know what? Here's my favourite argument against God. So, taking God in the way that philosophers define God, as a being that is omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and so on. Well, in order for a being like that to exist, we would have to assume that there are moral properties. But I'm a hardcore moral anti-realist. I don't think there are any moral properties. Yeah, there is no God. So that's what I'll go with. Let's go with that one. Yeah, the case for God from moral anti-realism. It's not an argument that's going to be particularly convincing to a lot of people. I take it that many theists. One of the reasons, actually, that many people cite for believing in God is so that it gets them morality. I guess that would be an argument that would be convincing to me because I've always been a very hardcore moral anti-realist. So at least if you insist on defining God as a being that is omnibenevolent, then I would have to say that being does not exist. Also, how old are you? 31. Average dude. You said at some point you don't believe in justifications. Could you elaborate? Yeah, I think that the skeptical arguments against justification are successful. I think things like Hume's skepticism of induction, Goodman's skepticism so Hume's argument against induction, Goodman's argument against induction, the problem of the criterion, Agrippa's trilemma. I mean, these sorts of arguments. I think that Hume's argument against reason, his claim that any sort of knowledge claim is going to degenerate into probability, and then probability degenerates into complete uncertainty. These seem to be just overwhelming to me. Like I just engage with those arguments, and it seems like a slam dunk. I mean, and none of the responses to them seem even slightly convincing. I had one of my friends said that they always felt that the responses to skeptical arguments just seemed like excuses. excuses in the sort of colloquial sense, right? So, like when somebody's done something bad and they come up with like a really obvious and lame excuse. He said that that's how the responses to skeptical arguments appeared to him, and I have the same impression, right? Like I read something like Hume's skeptical attack on reason, and it's just like a bulldozer. It's like, well, fuck, that's just everything's fucked then. And the responses to it, they seem really weak. So that's why I don't believe in justifications. Now, I should clarify that although I think the skeptical arguments are successful, I'm not a skeptic, because I think it's fine to hold beliefs without justification. So, when I say that skeptical arguments are successful and that there is no justification, obviously these are things that a skeptic would probably not want to say, because a skeptic is just going to be like a skeptic. They just ain't going to know, right? If a skeptic is just going to suspend judgment. I don't suspend judgment. I hold loads of beliefs. I like holding beliefs. So I'm quite happy to just believe stuff without justification. So I look at skeptical arguments, and what I see is something that just demolishes justification. But why shouldn't I just carry on holding beliefs anyway? So I'm happy to hold the belief that skepticism wins and there is no justification. But look, I can hold beliefs, so I can believe those things and I can carry on believing other things as well. Axes. Do you think that Marx's theory of historical materialism has any usefulness as an analytical method? I know nothing about Marx. Bel Deriel Separod, how is the blue finger doing? Well, it's still blue, and it's not just one finger, it's all of them. Ben, 0.14p. What do you think about perennialism, and do you have a metaphysical outlook? I don't know what perennialism is. As for metaphysics, I've always been inclined to empiricism, and I take empiricism to be I take it that what empiricists want to do is resist metaphysics, in the sense of, a lot of philosophers will try to account for the success of various discourses or practices by postulating entities of which those practices or discourses provide true descriptions. So, we try to explain morality, right? The practice of making moral judgments. We try to explain that by, postulating moral properties of which our moral judgments can provide true descriptions. Or in mathematics, we try to explain the development and success of mathematics by, postulating entities or structures of which mathematics provides true descriptions. That kind of metaphysics is something that to me, like the empiricist project is a project that is resisting that kind of metaphysics, right? We want to resist this sort of explanation by postulation. So I suppose I don't, in some sense, maybe I don't really have a metaphysical outlook. Insofar as I take it that I have a commitment to this project. Bep. What do you think are the best arguments for Stirner's egoism? What makes it appealing to follow one's own cause as opposed to another's? I don't really see Stirner's egoism as a position that is defended by argument in the traditional sense. I don't know, like, what would these arguments be? Like, you can find plenty of arguments in Stirner. There's arguments against essentialism. So, there's... but I don't know. Is it even an argument? I don't think Stirner is necessarily like saying that like you ought not to do any of these things. So like defining. So if I define myself as like an entity with certain properties, that creates constraints on how I can act. Stirner like identifies this as something that people do, and he offers an alternative. Similarly, Stirner argues against or attacks reification of concepts. He attacks the sort of projection of abstractions in sort of like our tendency to project abstractions into the world and treat them as external forces over us. So anyway, there's there's arguments in Stirner, but I mean, I don't really know if any of those arguments really get you to Stirnerite egoism. I'm not even sure what Stirnerite egoism is. Like, I'm not sure what's the proposition? What's the proposition that that Stirnerite egoism is supposed to be endorsing? Like, I don't know. When I read Stirner's book, it's it's a jumble of ideas, and it feels like it's coming from a certain perspective, but maybe it's more of a sort of stance in Van Fraasen's sense. Van Fraasen says that a lot of philosophical positions are not really propositions that might be true or false, but they're stances. They're sort of clusters of attitudes and commitments and values. And I think that I would see Stirnerite egoism as being more of a stance, and then that's a stance that you can take towards a whole bunch of different topics. So I'm afraid that's not a very satisfying answer. I don't have like the best argument for it. But I think the thing is that the arguments in Stirner's book, they like none of them in themselves really, and maybe not even all of them, none of them really establish Stirnerite egoism. It's more that I see it more as like Stirner has a particular stance, and then he's constructing various arguments from this stance, and those arguments deal with various different topics. That's the best I can do. Sorry. Bilbo Swaggins, do you think the good life is possible? I don't know. I don't know what the good life is. I don't know how to help with that one. I suppose I would probably just look at it in terms of whether or not I'm like feeling some sort of pleasure or sense of satisfaction about things I do, and I mean that's clearly possible. Be like I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what is the good life. I'll leave it up to you. You tell me. What do you think? What do you think the good life is? You tell me, and then I'll tell you whether it's possible. Bill Murray. Question 1. Got any books you can lend an aspiring philosophy student? Nope. My books are mine. I'm not interested in lending them to anybody. There are books I have which I don't want anymore, which I'm happy to give away. Now, I don't know whether these books would be of any use to an aspiring philosophy student. I was thinking of just giving them away to my university library or something like that. I really just need to get rid of them. But I suppose you can have them if you really want, although you're going to have to pay for postage and packaging. Question 2. If a consciousness can't look in upon itself and see its true nature, could it be that feelings are the vessel for which studying consciousness can be done, and consciousness for the study of our feelings? I'm going to be straight up with you, dude. I don't understand this question. I just don't get it. So... sorry, I'm going to just have to move on. Blank name. Are you open to reading any manga or anime? No. What type of TV shows do you watch in your leisure time? Well, I am a big fan of Doctor Who, particularly the classic series of Doctor Who. I like the modern show well enough, but it doesn't really excite me. I'm a fan of classic Doctor Who, and actually I go through sort of periods every now and then of watching one episode of that a day. Usually when I'm eating dinner. I'm not in one of those phases at the moment. What other shows do I like? I really love What We Do in the Shadows. That's a recent show which I think is really funny. Star Trek: The Next Generation is fantastic. What else do I watch? Inside Number 9. Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, Chris Morris's Jam, 15 Stories High. There are other, so I mean, Bottom. I mean, I can't really think off the top of my head what. It's not like there's a type. I don't know if there's a type of TV show that I watch. There are just some TV shows I like, and but I don't watch a lot of TV, so I don't really have a lot to say there. Also, what does what political philosophy does political philosophy interest you? I mean, I guess a little bit, not really. It's not really my field. If so, would you ever consider reading Marx, Engels, Lenin? I mean, I'd consider it, and it's probably something I should do. I haven't got around to it yet, though, and I mean, I've done the degree and MA and PhD, so I don't know whether I'm ever going to get around to it. Blue Sky Mars. Are there any books that transformed how you see the world in some aspect and had a strong impact on you? And if so, what were those books? Well, look, I think that Feyerabend's Against Method was like lightning when I first read it. It transformed my perspective on sort of science and philosophy of science, which was the area of philosophy that I guess I've always been most interested in was philosophy of science. And when I started out, I had kind of very, I think, just naively realist inclinations, and Against Method destroyed them. And of course also Hume. I mean, Hume has look, I mean, Kant said that Hume woke him from his dogmatic slumbers. I guess the same was probably true of me. I like Hume had a big influence. But I think the thing that was sort of early in my philosophical development, and for the last sort of nearly 10 years, the books and articles that impact me are ones. I mean, they're not really ones that change how I see things. They're more ones that like line up in an interesting way with inclinations that I already have. It's like they're ones that express my inclinations in ways that I haven't thought of before, or just particularly well. So there's a recent article that I read by Max Kahn-Hayward called "Practical Reason, Sympathy, and the Reactive Attitudes." That didn't change my mind about anything, but it was just like, damn, that guy gets it, and he just expressed it so well. Luc Bovins has an article called "The Two Faces of Acratics Anonymous," which, again, it did the same thing. It was like, it wasn't that it really changed my mind. It was more like it just expressed so perfectly kind of inchoate inclinations that I already had. I'm just like, yes, you guys get it. So those are the things that have a strong impact on me these days. It seems like, when I started out in philosophy, I had certain views which were quite quickly overturned radically. And I don't think there have been like major radical shifts since then. Yeah, I mean, maybe in some ways that's kind of sad, but I don't know. Look, I guess as you get older, you just sort of get more sort of things. I don't know. Life goes more quickly, and your views just get kind of set in stone. Maybe that's the way it works. It's quite sad, really. Okay, are there any books you're currently reading or read this year that you would recommend? I don't know. I don't know how to give recommendations when somebody doesn't tell me what they're interested in. I mean, you have to tell me what you're interested in. How am I supposed to answer that question? Like I know nothing about your inclinations or interests. So how can I give you a recommendation? Brent Gill, thoughts on pro-mortalism? Well, I mean, I don't want to kill myself, so why would I sign up for that? That seems like a dumb idea, given my goals. C, are there any thoughts on recent antinatalist and adoxastic attempts at avoiding metaphilosophical skeptical threats against truth-seeking conceptions of philosophy, such as Helen Beebe's equilibrialism? I don't know what that is. I don't know what equilibrism is. Okay, let me make a general point here. I think that skeptical arguments are basically successful, and I think that they're successful across the board. So they're not just successful with respect to the aim of seeking truth. And in fact, if you think about a lot of the classic skeptical arguments, like Hume's skepticism of induction, I mean, really, okay, you can frame that argument as skepticism towards the truth of propositions about the future, but I mean, it's fundamentally pragmatic, right? Like, it's okay, what justification is there for expecting success to continue? I don't think that you can avoid skepticism by just you know altering the aim of philosophy. But again, I don't really know what equilibrism is. I think there are aims other than truth which will be just as open to skeptical threat. Um, but whether that's the case for Helen Beebe's view, I don't know. What is your best argument for including philosophy as a mandatory discipline in school university curricula? I don't think much about schooling, and fundamentally, I don't give a shit about children. However, you know what? I want a population of people who are critical, who are non-dogmatic, anti-dogmatic even, who are intellectually curious. I want a population of people who are able to think in sort of broad terms, who are able to kind of think broadly about the world and our place in it. And I mean, as society develops, it seems like things become more and more and more specialized, both within academia and for professions outside of academia. Everybody gets skills in increasingly narrow areas, and everybody gets funneled into increasingly specific niches. And I mean, I don't know. That seems like in principle it's fine, but I think that it's useful to have a sort of just broad understanding of, well, look, how, as Wilfrid Sellers put it, how things in the broadest sense of the term hang together in the broadest sense of the term. And philosophy at its best should help with that. That's one of the things that philosophy is supposed to do. So I think that would be why it might be a good idea to have philosophy in schools. Probably not. I don't know if you would need it at a university level, but yeah, I mean, at least at school. I mean, I think once you get to university, I'm more in favour of just allowing people to make their own decisions about what sort of things they want to study. But yeah, I mean, at school, I think it would make sense. Also, do you find Pyrrhonism to be an attractive philosophical position? If not, why not? Well, I like holding beliefs. I just like holding beliefs, and why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I hold beliefs? I mean, is the Pyrrhonist going to give me a reason why I shouldn't hold beliefs? Does the Pyrrhonist say that I shouldn't hold beliefs? No, the Pyrrhonist isn't sure. The Pyrrhonist is just going to say they're not sure. So they're going to say that they don't know whether or not I should hold beliefs. So, what's the problem? What's the problem? Can you assert that there is a problem with me holding beliefs? I mean, can you say that you believe that there's a problem with me holding beliefs? Well, I don't know. Is the Pyrrhonist going to do that? Yeah. So yeah, is Pyrrhonism attractive? I think it is attractive. I think Pyrrhonists have come up with loads of very powerful arguments which I actually find intellectually convincing. But fundamentally, I like holding beliefs, and I'm just going to carry on doing that. Carlos Rodriguez, what are your thoughts on drugs? Are you for legalization of all substances? I always forget that drugs are illegal because that's just self-evidently stupid. I mean, it's just the dumbest thing of all time, and I always forget that we have this drug prohibition thing, because it just seems so obvious that we should have gotten past that by now. So those are my thoughts on drugs. CFHSCRHR. What's your favourite Platonic dialogue and why? I think Plato is shit, and I will never read him again. So I don't know what my favourite is. I hated it when I had to read it, and I'm glad that I won't have to do that again. CG, has your stance regarding Me Too changed since your drunk conversation with Cole? Your views on power imbalances, consent, etc. I don't actually remember what my stance was. I mean, well, I remember broadly speaking, but I don't remember the detail of it. I'm somewhat negative about it, right? I have concerns about it, and I think it's fair to say that I still do. Although I'm not sure that it doesn't seem to be. I haven't really been following I don't know, pop culture news and stuff, so I'm not really sure how influential it still is, or I'm not sure how that movement is currently manifesting itself. But you mentioned there, okay, power imbalances. So I assume that what you're talking about there is the notion that like power differentials undermine consent, which I think is just one of the worst arguments of all time. I think it's not just like something I disagree with. It's something that I find like morally abhorrent, because if you take that sort of perspective seriously, then it's pretty clear that you're going to have to say that, I don't know, if somebody's in, a relationship in like apartheid South Africa, an interracial relationship in apartheid South Africa is going to be morally wrong or something. And that seems ridiculous to me. So I don't like the problem. It may be that power imbalances are correlated with something that is problematic, but the power imbalance itself isn't the problem. And if you're saying it is the problem, I think that's an appalling perspective on things. Also, the other thing I think I had a problem with Me Too was it felt like we're sort of pushing for a society where interactions and particularly sort of any kind of sexual interaction is sort of being micromanaged, and I don't like that. That doesn't seem to me to be the right direction to go in. But yeah, I don't think my stance has changed. But again, I don't know exactly what I said. So Chitranch Srivastav. Hi Kane, how are you? Do you understand Hegel? Please make videos explaining Hegel. No, I don't understand Hegel, and I'm afraid I'm not going to make any videos on him. Give your views regarding Jordan Peterson and his philosophy. I have spoken about Peterson before. If you look at some of the other Ask Me Anything responses, I'm sure you can find probably quite a few of them where I've spoken about Peterson, because people do ask me about him. I don't like him, but I don't find him interesting. I just don't find him interesting enough to talk about, quite frankly. And I think it's strange that his 15 minutes hasn't run out. I think at this point it really should just be obvious to everyone that he's a complete joke. And but look, again, I don't really. If you like Peterson, then cool, knock yourself out. I just don't care enough about that guy to talk about it. But if you want to know what I think about him, then just check out some of those other Ask Me Anything videos, because I've definitely elaborated before. Chocodrum03. Kane, personal question. As far as I can tell, you're a very good philosopher and a brilliant person. Thank you very much. I was surprised you didn't simply keep on the academic route once you got the PhD. Is the composition really that tough? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Also, to what extent do you think university ranking systems reflect the quality of the work done in the philosophy department? Exeter is often not very high on those lists. Are grad students in Oxford, Cambridge, LSE that much better than graduates at Exeter? Well, look, with respect to careers, it's much better to be from a prestigious institution. You get, it just looks better, right? It looks better if you come from a prestigious institution. You also get better letters of recommendation, because you'll get letters from more prestigious philosophers. What matters so it's two things, right? Like, first of all, there's publication. You have to publish articles in prestigious journals and be from a prestigious institution and get letters of recommendation from prestigious individuals. That's how you succeed. I don't know whether people from prestigious institutions would necessarily be better philosophers, but I think they'd certainly have a better shot at an academic career. Personally, you got to bear in mind, I don't think about the future. I never have. I've never made any serious attempt at building the foundation for an academic career. If I had done that, I might have gone somewhere else to do my PhD. I might have put more effort into networking. I just did what I wanted to. This is what I've always done. I've always just done whatever I want to do in the moment. That's it. I would say if you're aiming for an academic career, then you want to get into the most prestigious place possible. You also ask, are there really that many young philosophers better than you in the UK? Yes, absolutely. I am pretty good at philosophy, but there are people, plenty of people in the UK who are outstandingly good, like who are, I don't know how they do it. And I mean, these people are younger than me as well. Like it's like I will talk I meet a lot of people these days, and not just people from prestigious institutions. I meet like a lot of people. I encounter a lot of people who are like still teenagers, who are as good as me at philosophy, and who are way better than I was at their age. I don't know how this has happened. Like there are people, because I was pretty damn good at philosophy, but like the quality of philosopher out there is, I mean, it's outstandingly high. And and you know what? A lot of these people are going to struggle just as much as I did. Well, I didn't really struggle because I didn't put any effort in it. Let me rephrase that. A lot of these people are going to fail to get academic careers because it is that tough. So if you're going into philosophy, bear that in mind. So you also ask, as an international student, any thoughts and advice on studying philosophy in the UK will be much appreciated. I can't really give you advice. I don't do that, but yeah, I mean, look, my thoughts on what I just said. I think that doing philosophy it's wonderful. I don't regret it at all, but you should only do it if you genuinely if you just want to do it for its own sake, and if you have funding for it, or you're independently wealthy. As a career move, it's totally insane. So, again, just bear that in mind. Christopher L. What is your opinion of honorary doctorates? Do you know what? I don't actually even know what they are. Genuinely. I don't even know what they are. Like, I know that people get them, but I don't know what they are. Christopher Mora. Would you consider yourself a nihilist? If not, why not? Well, nihilism is not a word that is really used in contemporary philosophy. So, I mean, well, it is, but like, it's used in all sorts of different ways, and it's not like frequently used. So it's like, if you like, as a position, like nihilism, it can mean many, many different things in different contexts. So I can say that I am an anti-realist about value in general. I'm yeah, I don't think that there are any stance-independent values. Okay, but does that make me a nihilist? Well, I love making value claims. I love making moral and aesthetic and epistemic judgments. The term nihilism in metaethics is sometimes used to refer to moral error theory, the view that all moral judgments are false. I find moral error theory attractive. I'm not sure I would call myself an error theorist. So yeah, I don't know. I think that I think I would say I'm nihilism adjacent, but I'm not sure whether I would call myself a nihilist because I'm not really sure what nihilism is supposed to mean. You also ask my position. What position do I take on meaning? Hedonism, existentialism, perhaps meaning isn't a well-defined question. Yeah, I think I'd probably go with the not well-defined question there. I suppose yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Like, what do you mean by meaning? What is that? What do you mean there? Like, I don't have a take on it because I'm not really sure what that's in reference to. Siltio, are you alive? I certainly hope so. Or maybe I should hope not. I used to be really scared of death. I'm not particularly scared of it anymore. But I guess it would have alleviated my fear of death if I realized I was already dead. Like, if I'm already dead right now, then death is nothing to be scared of, right? So maybe I should hope that I'm not alive. Connor Jennings, have you adopted a philosophy of life, Stoicism, Epicureanism, etc.? And if so, why did you choose it? I think that mostly, like, that sort of philosophy of life stuff just seems like kind of bad psychology to me. But I haven't adopted a philosophy of life. And the reason why is because I'm fundamentally an episodic. Galen Strawson has this nice distinction between different attitudes that you can take to your life. So some people have a kind of narrative view of their life. They They think a lot about their future, their plans for the future. They ruminate often on the past, and they see their life as a sort of story. They have a plan, a story for themselves, and they see themselves as like as a story, right? So that the self is like viewed in terms of the past and the future. It's viewed in terms of where we came from and where we're going. And I think that for that sort of person, this kind of philosophy of life's like Stoicism, Epicureanism, that's going to be attractive. But I'm an episodic. I'm an extreme episodic, and episodics are people who are more like just kind of living in the moment. I basically never think about my past. I think about my future, but I only ever really think like a week into the future. I mean, I do have longer term plans, but what I'll do is I'll just kind of note them down and then forget about them. I have problems that I'm working on right now, and that's all I think about. And like anything beyond a week or so is just, it's like a void to me. And anything in the past I just don't care about. I don't have a very good memory anyway, and I also am not particularly skilled at sort of making life plans and understanding how to live in the world. So frankly, even if I did think about the past and the future, I wouldn't I don't know, I wouldn't have much to do about it. So yeah, I'm an episodic, and I think that for that kind of personality, it's just not like, there's not much that's really offered by this kind of philosophy of life stuff. David Ostrom, what do you think about continental philosophy? I don't know continental philosophy. David Calmenti, do you think that property dualism is true? I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even know what property dualism is. Like, I have no idea. I've never been able to figure it out. It just seems straight up like incoherent, and just obviously incoherent. The claim that it just makes no sense to me to say that there's one substance. There's one substance, physical substance, but the physical substance has both physical properties and non-physical properties. Like, what? I just don't get it. I don't understand. So I don't think it's true, because I literally don't know what it's claiming. The funny thing is, I had to actually teach property dualism. Like I've been a TA at a university, and property dualism was one of the things I had to teach. I had no idea what I was teaching, but apparently I was successful. I mean, like I seemed to communicate something to the students, and they seemed to do. The people who chose to talk about it seemed to do, just as well as the people who talked about any other topic. But the truth is, I don't know what property dualism is even saying. Do you instead believe that consciousness is completely physical? Well, I wouldn't consider myself a physicalist, mainly because I don't think that... So I think that there's two different ways of looking at physicalism, right? You can look at physicalism as a proposition about what exists. And I think that viewed in that way, I'm just not sure what physicalism is even claiming. It doesn't seem to me to be well defined. Certainly, we wouldn't want to say that, the physical is just whatever is specified in our current physical theories. We wouldn't want to say that because, you expect that physical theories are going to change. Nobody supposes that science is complete, right? Like, nobody thinks that we've reached the end of science and there's going to be no more developments. No, there is. We think more to heaven and earth than what is specified in physics. So we don't want to say that the physical is just whatever is specified in our current theories. On the other hand, if you say that the physical is whatever will be specified by ideal theories, or whatever will be specified at the end of science, then I mean that just seems to be kind of self-evidently trivial. Obviously we don't know what that's going to be. So I think it makes a bit more sense maybe to look at physicalism as a sort of stance, in Van Frassen's sense. So Bas Van Frassen says that a lot of philosophical views are not really they're not really beliefs. They're not really like claims that some proposition is true. They should really be understood more as kind of packages of values and commitments, and maybe some beliefs as well. But you know, something like physicalism, I think, can be understood as, you know, a commitment to sort of explaining things in sort of the terms that are provided by science. It's a commitment to like endorsing, in some sense, current, like, contemporary scientific explanations, and it's a sort of completeness claim, like science provides in some sense a kind of complete picture of the relevant phenomena. So there's sort of physicalism as a stance, and I mean, all I would say to that is I'm not a stance physicalist, right? If physicalism can be understood as a stance, I don't think I would be a stance physicalist. I would be a stance empiricist. So yeah, I wouldn't say that consciousness is completely physical, but that's just because I have problems with this notion of physical. Desnir, what is a woman? If you're asking for a definition that cites necessary and sufficient conditions, I don't have one. But I don't really think there's much that you can conclude from that, because I don't have a definition that cites necessary and sufficient conditions for any concept. You know, what is a chair? Like, what is knowledge? You know, like, so for both everyday concepts and for philosophically substantive concepts, I don't think you're going to get, you know, definitions with necessary and sufficient conditions. I don't think that's how concepts work. And anyway, why would you want them to work that way? Why would I want the world to be sorted into neat little boxes? That's so boring. The line that I tend to take on this question is, look, there's all kinds of ways of drawing, you know, lines between people, and other animals for that matter. So, you know, there are various, like, when we look at human populations, we find that they tend to sort themselves into various groups. And, you know, there's a significant distinction, that there's like this split that is found when you look at in terms of various sexual characteristics, for instance. So you can sort people according to their chromosomes. You can sort people according to their reproductive organs. You can sort people according to secondary sex characteristics. And what you find is, for all of these sort of biological properties, is that people kind of they sort of fall into they're broadly coextensive. I mean, they're nearly coextensive, right? So if you sort people according to chromosomes, then you get a load of people in this camp, a load of people in this camp, and then there's a few sort of stragglers who don't fall neatly into either camp. And then if you sort people according to reproductive organs, you get a load of people in this camp, a load of people in this camp, and again a few more stragglers. But it's not perfect, right? Like, the overlap isn't perfect. So if you look at it in terms of chromosomes, then, you know, maybe person X is over here. But if you look at it in terms of reproductive organs, maybe they're over here, right? Like, if there's some, is it the I think, because you can have the XY chromosome, but then if the SYR gene is not functioning normally, then that person can end up developing a vagina. So, you know, similarly, and so, yeah, okay, you can look at chromosomes, you can look at types of gametes, you can look at reproductive organs, secondary sex characteristics, and you, like, all of these are ways of sorting people. And so these are ways of sorting people in terms of biological properties, and then there's ways of sorting people in terms of things like social roles. So one of the striking things we find about human societies is that, well, it's not just that we sort people according to, say, chromosomes or reproductive organs. These sortings also correlate very strongly with distinctions that are socially significant, with social roles. So you know, that's not the case for all biological properties, right? Because you can similarly sort people by, like, blood type, But blood type just doesn't really seem to matter socially. I mean, there are some very, very limited contexts where it does matter, like if you're getting a blood transfusion. But like there have been societies where, you know, okay, you sort people by blood type, and that's just not going to tell you anything interesting about the structure of those societies. On the other hand, you can look at sorting people by biological properties, and that's going to tell you lots of very interesting things about the social structure of the societies. So, what's my take on the man-woman thing? I mean, I think that there's various ways of dividing people. Biologically, these biological divisions are imbued with enormous social significance, and so I think that like what you have is a kind of classification system where it's like, well, men are in you classify men and women, but I don't really take it that there's a. I mean, look, I'm a kind of constructivist about kinds in general, and I mean, there are going to be cases where you have somebody who has XY chromosomes, but they end up developing, you know, what you might think of as the female reproductive organs. Okay, where do you classify them? Well, you know, it depends on the context, right? It depends on what you're interested in. And then sometimes you might get people who have XY chromosomes and they have the male reproductive organs and so on, but they end up adopting the sort of social roles, social characteristics of that we would associate or that are correlated with X chromosomes and female reproductive organs. So, okay, how do you classify them? Well, I'm quite happy to say that you know, terms like man and woman are, generally speaking, used to track the sort of socially significant distinction. So yeah, I'm happy to just class that person as a woman. In fact, I'm generally just happy to go with whatever people ask. I mean, if somebody says they're a woman, I'll just go with that. So hopefully that gives you a sense of my perspective on this. I don't think it's yeah. I think that's pretty much it. There's various ways that there's various different, you know, properties that divide people. You know, and there's various ways that people can think and feel with respect to these properties. And you know, for me, like who I classify as man or woman or as male or female is going to be dependent on the context, but in most everyday contexts, I will just go with whatever people request. Diana, on behalf of Sarah and myself, what on earth was that red dot video? Dominic Kearney. Hi Kane, I was wondering when we would be seeing a video on Humean constructivism. I've just defended the view in my master's thesis and it would be keen to hear your thoughts. The problem I'm having with this video is that Humean constructivism seems like a kind of reactive position. Like it seems as though I'm really struggling to distinguish it from sort of subjectivism, relativism. I mean, it seems like actually it is committed to subjectivism, relativism in some sense. And it seems like you get to Humean constructivism, or the way that someone like Sharon Street gets to Humean constructivism is just sort of via the elimination of other theories. And I've had a bit of difficulty like presenting the positive view. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure when I'm going to do that, if at all. Maybe I will never do it. A second question, if you prefer this one. What are your thoughts on Kantian idealism and the prospects of it being a systematically defensible anti-realist metaphysical position? I think the basic problem with it is with the notion that there are uh, universal structures of experience. Like there's this, a priori structure that constitutes experience. I in some ways, I suppose I'm sympathetic to the Kantian position, at least the Kantian position as I understand it. I mean, I should say that I don't really understand it. I don't really. Let me just make that point. Actually, I don't really understand Kant, so I'm just. You should ignore what I'm saying here because I have no idea what I'm talking about. But basically, look. So the notion that we have like a conceptual scheme for organizing experience, I'm very much on board with. But the idea that there is this that like the conceptual scheme has to be universal, I find very implausible. I think that experience is much more pliable. That you can kind of organize it in all sorts of different ways, and so I think there are going to be multiple truths, multiple worlds, perhaps. Peter Lipton once had a very lovely description of Thomas Kuhn. He said that Thomas Kuhn was Kant on wheels, and I think that's probably an appropriate description of a lot of contemporary constructivists or relativists. It's Kant on wheels, right? Like you can. Yes, so yes, experience has to be structured, and like we impose kind of concepts on experience, and that's what allows us to state facts about, like we can state facts about the world only once we assume a particular conceptual scheme. But the conceptual scheme is open to change. It can be overthrown, and in fact I don't even think it's necessarily a matter of overthrowing it. I think you can just sort of flip between different perspectives very easily in the way that you flip a Necker cube. Yeah, Kant was wrong to think that there were universal structures. For instance, I don't think that like experience has to be structured in accordance with Euclidean geometry. I don't think that experience has to be spatial at all. In fact, I'm pretty convinced at this point that if you take, for instance, just touch sensation, I don't think you can derive spatiality from the sensation of touch. So that's okay. Well, that's something we get from vision, but I don't see it as being just built into the structure of experience. Anyway, hopefully that answers that question. Again, I don't really know Kant, so could be just missing the point there. Don't you fucking ooh me. Have you ever encountered notably novel / fascinating / advanced philosophical ideas in popular media like fiction, books, movies, songs, etc.? If you have, what were those? I haven't, to be honest. I think that the best, so the media franchise that I've been most impressed with in terms of its sort of philosophical exploration of philosophy is Star Trek: The Next Generation, which I think is genuinely good. Like it deals with philosophical topics in a genuinely sophisticated way, but I wouldn't say it's particularly novel or advanced, right? Like I don't think it's going to be introducing any novel philosophical ideas, and I mean it's certainly not advanced. But it's sophisticated relative to the vast majority of other media. There are certain episodes in that in Star Trek: The Next Generation specifically. I can't speak of the other Star Treks because I haven't seen them, but the Next Generation specifically, where I was really impressed. Like it presents. There are episodes which sort of present certain. Often it's kind of moral issues, but sometimes they kind of go into stuff concerning like personal identity and other areas of philosophy. But it presents alternative perspectives on things, and it always takes both sides seriously and like does a really good job of presenting arguments for both sides and like actually making both sides of the argument just like emotionally understandable, right? Like you can empathize. It gives you the ability to empathize with characters on both sides of an issue, and I think that does a good job. But I really don't. Yeah, I don't think there's any that I would describe as novel or advanced in dealing with philosophy. Um, what do you think of the idea that philosophy should be taught in schools in the same way math currently is? Do you think it could be done? What would be the societal effects? What would be effects on the field of philosophy itself? I can't imagine the field would change that much. I think if there would be society, I mean, I think it probably is a good idea, right? Like it's probably a good idea to encourage a population to be, critical, to be non-dogmatic. It's a good idea to give people a kind of broad understanding of just like different issues, like so in philosophy we deal with ethics, we deal with philosophy of science, philosophy of mind. It gives people a broad perspective on the world and humanity's place in it, and I think that's useful. So I would like to, yeah, okay, it would be good to teach that in schools. I'm quite sure it could be done. I mean, why not? We teach lots of other things. Why couldn't you teach philosophy? So yeah, I guess I would be in favour of that. What are 3 philosophical ideas, concepts, arguments almost everyone should learn? Um, you know, the notion of like everyone should do X, or like everybody should read this, everybody should learn this. I don't know. I just don't like that. That kind of bothers. It's it's always difficult to answer these questions because fundamentally I don't like telling other people what to do, and I don't want everyone in the world to be the same, and I don't think it matters if people have different interests, and like it's fine. Like you don't have to be interested in philosophy. Um, I I guess if I had to, the thing I would teach everyone about would be the problem of induction, because I think the problem of induction is a very deep problem. A lot of times people will present it as this kind of interesting abstract problem, but they think it's something that it's like, oh yeah, Hume raised this like interesting little puzzle, and it's not just interesting; it's very difficult to deal with. But we can just ignore it and move on. The thought is it's not like significant to our everyday lives. I actually think it is significant. I think that we really don't know what the future holds. That the trouble with just assuming the uniformity of nature is that nature actually isn't uniform, that regularities very often fail, they fail in unexpected ways, and there is a tendency that human beings have to, like, when unexpected events happen, when unexpected, unpredictable events happen, then after the fact, you can tell yourself a story about why those events happened, and you can explain those events. And then once you have an explanation and a satisfying story for those unexpected events, you can then kind of project that into the future and sort of say, oh, well, now I can predict things in the future on the basis of my explanation. And I think that's very dangerous, because I think no, I think we really don't know, and things just do fail, and yeah, these regularities do fail in unexpected ways. For all his faults, Nassim Nicholas Taleb expresses this very nicely in The Black Swan. I actually really like that book, and I think that because he understands that the problem of induction is a deep problem, and it's a problem that we all face every day of our lives, but there's this tendency to construct narratives, and then even though we all face it all the time, and we have this tendency to construct narratives which gives us the illusion of predictable, explainable regularities. So I think that I would probably teach that problem. There's one. You asked for 3. I'll give you 1 because I can't think of any others off the top of my head right now. So there you go. Edu Dam, do you have some thoughts on love? I like it, and I don't know what else to say about it. I don't really have any thoughts on love. No, I'm sorry. I really wish I could offer something more substantial, but that is not a topic that I have really thought about philosophically. And it's a topic that in some ways I suppose just seems to I don't know, outstrip philosophy, right? Like, love matters to me a great deal, but it feels like something very different to doing philosophy, and it's one of those things where you sort of think you can do philosophy about this, I guess, but it almost would feel as though philosophy would just miss the point. It's not really going to, yeah, it's not really going to capture what's going on there. It's something you just have to experience, and we can only hope that the people who desire it, at least, are able to experience it, because it is a wonderful thing. Um, Ekitap Cafe. What is the proposition that is 100% must be true for you? Well, I don't have a credence of 100% in any proposition. I am a fallibilist about everything. I'm not 100% certain of anything. If I ask what is the meaning of meaning, would I be silly? No, definitely not silly. That is a very sensible question, a very reasonable question. People talk about meaning a lot. I've had questions already in this AMA asking about meaning. So meaning matters, but what the hell is it? I don't know, right? Like very often people will ask about meaning, and I just think, okay, well, like what is that? I think that it seems like people have this feeling there's something important there, but expressing what that is, like if you ask a question like what is the meaning of life, I mean certainly half of the work in answering that question is just figuring out what the hell it actually means. So you can ask what is the meaning of meaning. I don't think it's a silly question. It's a question that I don't really have an answer to, unfortunately, or unfortunately in this context, because it's one that I haven't really thought about that much. I suppose I would say, meaning is, there's a sense of meaning where it refers to like the semantic content of words. There's a more, I suppose, I don't know, like there's a more significant, deep sense of meaning where it's about, the purpose or goal of our life. So maybe that's the meaning of meaning. Emerson Green asks, what are your current thoughts on scientism as characterized by Van Inwagen? I often see skepticism about the existence of scientism as a phenomenon in academia or wider culture. I'm wondering if you share that feeling or not. Well, I don't know anything about scientism as characterized by Van Inwagen. I haven't read Van Inwagen's work on scientism. I did actually look this up on Google. I did a cursory Google, typed in Van Inwagen scientism before doing this, and I couldn't find anything. So I don't know what Van Inwagen, how he characterizes it. But for scientism more generally, well, I think that skepticism of scientism as a phenomenon is a bit strange because I mean, there are people who are explicitly defending scientism. Yeah, Alex Rosenberg, James Ladyman, and Don Ross. I mean, of course, the term is used as a pejorative very often, but I think there are plenty of people who are just quite happy to accept, like, yeah, scientism, science, yay, right? Like, it's a common enough thing to think that, like the only reliable method we have for getting at the facts about the world is the method of science. That science is just wonderful. That other areas of inquiry are fundamentally misconceived. I mean, these sorts of views, I think, are reasonably common. I mean, maybe not the majority, but there's enough people out there defending those views that it seems a bit strange to me to deny that it's a phenomenon that even exists. Okay, what are my thoughts on scientism? Well, I have a few different problems with scientism. I think that first of all, I don't really see science as being a unified enterprise, and I think that it's actually something of an accident, a historical accident, really, that we have this concept of science at all. It's not. And I mean, it's not obvious, right? Like where we draw the line between science and non-science. That remains a significant philosophical problem, and it's not clear. So even if we could clearly draw the line between science and non-science, I don't think that what we would end up with. I don't think that science is something that is going to be kind of clearly delineated with by like some particularly reliable method for getting at the facts. The way I tend to see it is there's a whole bunch of different fields that are labeled science. They have different methods and different problems. Some of them are progressing quite well, some of them not so much. Okay, so in physics, for example, compare, for example, in physics, like you can learn about the facts by manipulating fundamental particles and discovering laws that govern fundamental particles. Compare that to in biology, where you might learn about things by performing investigations into model organisms, like particular types of bacteria, and then you extrapolate from those model organisms. I mean, the kind of inference that you make when you learn something about a model organism, the kind of inference you might make from a model organism to other types of organisms, that's very different to, performing an experiment at the Large Hadron Collider and then making an inference from, this type of particle to other types of particles. And then compare, these sort of manipulative sciences where we're getting our hands dirty and messing around with things, to sciences like astronomy, which are more sort of observational. We can't actually go out into space and manipulate quasars. And then compare that to something like climate science, which has a lot of use. I mean, whereas in astronomy, for instance, it's more observationally based, and you can make lots and lots of observations of lots and lots of different types of stars. In climate science, we can't make lots of observations of planets like ours with climates like ours, so we run simulations. I mean, there's all sorts of just different methods, and I just don't think that science is really a unified enterprise. I also think that science overlaps with other areas like philosophy in significant ways. You see that come out especially with conceptual issues like the species problem. Lots that raises philosophical problems. So to a large extent, I think the distinction between science and non-science is kind of arbitrary, and that alone makes it a bit strange to say that like science is the thing to which we should give our allegiance, or like science is the thing that has the reliable method for getting at knowledge of the world. I would say that I think on any argument that makes it plausible that science is our only reliable tool for getting to knowledge of the world, I suspect that the concept of science will become so weak as to be trivial. Because there are ways of saying what the scientific method is that makes it kind of trivial, right? Like you can say, well, the scientific method involves making observations, forming a hypothesis on the basis of those observations, making a prediction, and then seeing if that prediction turns out to be true, right? Like you can frame it very abstractly in those ways, but I mean, like, look, everybody does that, murder detectives do that kind of thing. That's so abstract that, like, if that's what you mean by science, then basically everybody is engaging in science. And so yeah, maybe on that definition, science is the only reliable method of getting at the world, but you've sort of weakened the notion of science so much that it's kind of trivial. So yeah, that's one problem I have with it. I also think that look, what's motivating scientism is, of course, this attitude that like science is just wonderful, science is great. But I'm a bit more skeptical of science. Like, I'm skeptical of it just as a general institution in a couple of ways. So first of all, I'm very strongly inclined to anti-realism. I'm not a scientific realist. I don't think that scientific theories get at the truth. Now, of course, you can be an anti-realist about science and you can still be scientistic. I mean, I suppose that the zenith of scientism in the history of philosophy was logical positivism, and the logical positivists were that was also probably the zenith of scientism. So yeah, certainly, you know, scientific anti-realism is not incompatible with scientism. But I mean, there's kind of a tension, right? Because a lot of people, I think, take it that one of the things we get from science is it's giving us the facts about reality, and I just don't think it does that. And you know, I've got plenty of videos where I've argued in favour of an anti-realist line on this. So in terms of the sort of kind of epistemic benefits that we get from science, I'm a bit more skeptical. I don't think science gets at the truth. I don't think it tells us the, you know, reality behind the phenomena. In terms of practical benefits, I think I'm probably a bit more, again, you know, a bit more on the skeptical side. I mean, you know, I just look at it like this: has science and technology, you know, has it made our lives better? Well, yes, in some ways, but I mean, look, there are many ways in which science and technology have the potential to improve our lives. I'm not sure that that potential has really been realized in many cases. I think there are many respects in which, you know, modern life just seems to be awful. There seems to have been all sorts of unintended consequences of technological development. I think there's a great, you know, increasing social isolation. There's increasing existential risk, you know, from things like nuclear weapons. I mean, like this stuff, and it's, I don't know. I mean, it seems weird to like blame science for this. So, you know, but I guess the point is this, right? I think there is a tendency that some people have to like credit science with technological successes. So like whenever technology does stuff good, right, we take that as that's something that science has given us, right? But then when technology makes life worse, or when technology is misused, then it's like, oh, that's not really the fault of science. That's just the fault of how we're applying technology. So when you look at things like how you know, so like the way that we can now sort of manipulate algorithms on social media, and you know, we can mine people's data, and you know, powerful companies can use that to manipulate whole populations. I mean, it's like, okay, well, that's not the fault of science, right? That's the fault of how we're choosing to apply science. Well, okay, fair enough. That's a fair enough point. But then, like, why would you kind of credit science with technological successes? Like, I feel like if it gets the credit for the successes, then shouldn't it get at least part of the blame for the failures? But yeah, so that's another point. Is I'm a little bit technology skeptical, let's say. Maybe I should put it that way. I also think that you can see plenty of fields which were once remarkably exciting and were making lots of progress, but progress has slowed. I think this is the case in, you know, fundamental physics. For instance, it seems that, you know, if you go back to the early 1900s, there were just remarkable discoveries being made. There was remarkable progress. You know, the general relativity, quantum mechanics, these just like overthrew our common sense views of the world, and completely changed the direction of intellectual inquiry. But you know, over the last few decades, it really seems like that field just seems like it's kind of running out of steam. You know, we pump billions into particle accelerators only for them to, you know, produce exactly the results that we all predicted, and so everything just stays the same. I mean, it's like, okay, that doesn't, like, why is that impressive? I mean, why is it impressive that you've just you know, spent you know, £100 million on yet another theory that confirms, on yet another experiment that confirms general relativity, or that confirms the standard model? Like, that's totally uninteresting. That seems totally uninteresting to me. It seems like a complete waste of money. So I'm just really expressing here ways in which I have a somewhat more, you know, negative or skeptical attitude to science, right? So I mean, I actually really like science in many ways, but like I would not say that I endorse scientism for all of those reasons. That was kind of a bit of a ramble, but I hope you maybe got something out of that. Entity identity. Why philosophy? Well, I don't know. Why not? I don't really think about it. I don't think about that. I just do it. I just do it and I enjoy it. That's it. And I don't need a reason. Okay, Erop. I don't know how I'm supposed to pronounce this. It's not using the Latin alphabet, so I'm really stuck with that. Sorry about that. You ask, does speech act theory have a future? In what direction can linguistic philosophy develop? Yeah, I think philosophers have traditionally been, well, I mean, maybe not traditionally, but, you know, like analytic philosophy, very focused on semantics. And I think there's an assumption underlying a lot of philosophical work that there is, you know, such a thing as the sort of the real meaning of statements or the real meaning of judgments, which can be uncovered with philosophical analysis. So when people make moral judgments, for instance, philosophical analysis will reveal the underlying semantics of moral judgments. A lot of the work in metaethics is focused on that problem, and I have long felt that there's something deeply misguided about that. I don't think there is such a thing as, like, if you take a moral judgment, for instance, like abortion is wrong, I think it's just indeterminate what it means. There are many different ways people use that statement, and there are many different ways it can be precisified. It just seems to me like a lot of these theories that meta-ethicists come up with that are designed to, you know, account for the meaning of moral judgments, like that just seems like a mistake. And something like speech act theory might be a useful corrective to this, because speech act theory, you know, it refocuses the question not on what the semantics of the judgments are, but it's focused on what people are doing with words. And so, yeah, I mean, maybe that would be a useful corrective to some of the errors in some areas of philosophy. But I don't really have like any detailed thoughts on it. Exalted Kitharode. Have you changed your mind on structural realism? Can there be relations all the way down without objects to be related? I'm not. Well, I don't think I've changed my mind on structural realism. I wouldn't describe myself as a structural realist. Now, this question, though, can there be relations all the way down without objects to be related? I'm not sure that was ever an issue for me. So it's very hard to conceive of relations without a relator. But so what? You know, like, so what? I mean, I don't know, maybe the world is just weird, right? Like, maybe that's just the way maybe that's just how things work. I mean, it is strange, right? But the thing is that there's lots of things that are strange, but that actually, you know, on kind of further thought, or like once you have developed the correct background concepts, they can make sense. Like even round squares, for instance. So, you know, like, so if I talk about round squares, well, that just seems like obviously and completely incoherent. And of course, there are ways of, you know, defining square and round where that would be incoherent. But like, if you take a square to consist of sort of a shape with 4 straight lines, all of the same length, then actually if you have a non-Euclidean geometry, you can get a round square. So, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe relations without relator, we just don't have the like right kind of background concepts to make that understandable. I just tend to think that the motivations for anti-realism hold just as strongly with respect to the structural content of theories as to the other types of content of theories. So you know, that's why, yeah, like I'm not a structural realist, but I'm not. I don't really like appeals to the claim that like certain aspects of theories are, you know, are inconceivable or are contradictory or whatever, because I think that conceptual development over human history has shown that there are plenty of things that were once thought to be inconceivable or contradictory that today we seem to be perfectly capable of conceiving of. So yeah, like human conceptual capacity is it's remarkably it's more open than we might expect. So you ask, doesn't epistemic anti-realism lead to metaphysical relativism and separate symbolic universes akin to Goodman's worlds? Well, I mean, so what if it does? Like, it doesn't. It seems fine to me. I really like Nelson Goodman. I love Nelson Goodman. So my inclinations are very much in line with Nelson Goodman. So I'm fine with that. But let's address the question, right? So does it lead to that? Well, okay. It depends on what you mean by epistemic anti-realism. There's two ways I would understand that. So in one sense, you might be using it in the sense of a kind of skepticism, where well, for instance, structural realism, right? Like epistemic structural realism would say, all we can know is the structure, or something like constructive empiricism, right? That's a form of epistemic anti-realism, because the constructive empiricist says all we can know are the observable phenomena, and then we're agnostic about the claims theories make beyond that. So these are kinds of epistemic anti-realism. It just imposes like limits to what we can know. Now, in that sense, I mean, I don't see why that would lead to metaphysical relativism. So like from the point of view of a constructive empiricist, well, there's an objective world, or at least there can be an objective world. It's just we don't have access to it, or at least we don't have access to significant parts of it. So there are facts about what the unobservable world is like, but we just don't know. It outstrips our knowledge. That seems perfectly coherent as a position. So that wouldn't be metaphysical relativism. There's another sense of epistemic anti-realism where we might use it to mean anti-realism about epistemic norms. Like this would deny that there are stance-independent epistemic norms. There are no stance-independent facts about what people ought or ought not to believe. So, in this context, we talk about epistemic anti-realism in a similar way as we talk about like moral anti-realism. But I mean, for this kind of epistemic anti-realism, again, there are still facts about the world. There are facts about truth and falsehood. There are just no facts about what we ought to believe. So it's like, the Earth is a sphere. Well, that's true, and we can produce arguments to the effect that it's true that the Earth is a sphere, and we can produce evidence which shows that the Earth is a sphere, etc. But we would just be denying that anybody ought to believe, or like. So what we would say is that like whether or not you ought to believe that the Earth is a sphere is going to depend on your desires and goals. So yeah, if you desire to believe the truth, then you ought to believe that the Earth is a sphere. But if you don't care about the truth, then that particular imperative will hold no force over you. But yeah, I mean, that doesn't lead to metaphysical relativism either. So I think the usual ways of understanding what epistemic anti-realism is do not lead to metaphysical relativism. But of course, there may be other senses of epistemic anti-realism that do entail metaphysical relativism. Does your empiricist and anti-realist leanings prioritize mind-like stuff? Experiences, folk theories about the mental over non-mind stuff in metaphysics, and doesn't it lead to idealism? Well, the thing is with this is that I'm a kind of global constructivist, and it may be the case that global constructivism is committed to a kind of idealism. But here's the sort of catch on this. I want to say that there is a distinction between minds and non-minds. It seems to me that the mind-dependent, mind-independent distinction is actually a very straightforward distinction. And it's a very useful distinction, and it's something that I accept. Like, I think it's true. I think it's true that there are some things that are mind-dependent and some things that are mind-independent. And here's how you get to that kind of distinction. So let's say that there's, I don't know, a cylinder of gas, right? Well, I can observe other people investigating this cylinder of gas. I can observe them forming beliefs about the cylinder of gas. And I can observe that what those people believe doesn't change the way the cylinder of gas behaves. So, I can see both things going on, right? Like, I can see that, Frank believes X, Vincent believes Y, Verity believes A, Sydney believes B, right? So I can see all of these different beliefs about the cylinder of gas, and I can see those beliefs changing, and maybe all of these people end up converging on X or something. And then maybe there's like another society where everybody ends up converging on Y, right? But the point is that, look, this cylinder of gas, it just does what it does, and it doesn't seem to matter what's going on in any of their minds, right? So I can see their theories, their models, their beliefs, and I can see that the cylinder of gas just does what it does independently of what they're thinking and believing. Okay, right, so now what we have is, it's very useful, right? It's going to be very useful to me to model the cylinder of gas as independent of Frank's mind, independent of Verity's mind. So like, I now have this kind of model of human beings and the world where there are human beings who have minds, and there's this world with non-mind stuff, or stuff that's independent of what human beings are thinking and feeling. That's a really useful model. But then I notice, of course, I am a human being. And I'm probably going to want my model to have, a broad explanatory scope. I want to be included in my models of human beings and my models of the world. So, I have this model of human beings and how they relate to the world. And on this model, there's human beings with minds, and there's stuff in the world that is independent of minds. And then I just apply myself to that, because I'm like, okay, I'm a human being as well. So there's going to be stuff that's independent of my mind. Now, this might sound very kind of trivial, and I mean, it's supposed to be, right? Like, this is like how we build up to a totally kind of colloquial, I almost want to say empirical, right? Mind dependent, mind independent distinction. Now, do I believe, though, that this distinction is like independent of our perspectives? Do I believe that it holds like objectively? Well, no, right? Like, this is a distinction that is made within. It's made from within a particular perspective. It holds from within a particular perspective. And so, the sort of line that I take is that truth is, the truth of any proposition is relative to a perspective, and there's no perspective independent way of judging different perspectives. No perspective is objectively privileged. So we can make the mind dependent, mind independent distinction from within a perspective, but that's as far as we can go. Now, I'm inclined to think that that's, I don't know, I mean, why isn't that enough? Why isn't that enough to say, okay, then I'm not an idealist, because, I happen to be using a model which gives us minds, and it gives us non-mind stuff. But maybe in some sense I am an idealist. I mean, I admit that, like, to say that truth is dependent on perspective, that does seem straightforwardly to, like, there's some sense in which it seems like, well, okay, you're an idealist then, because, I mean, like, we construct the perspectives. So everything that there is, I mean, insofar as you're giving an ontology of what there is, it's dependent on your perspective, right? Which is a mind, which is something constructed by the mind. So, I admit that, yeah, I mean, there might be a sense in which my views commit me to idealism. I don't think it's particularly problematic, though, and I think that I can make a perfectly sensible mind-dependent, mind-independent distinction. If you are a constructivist, what is your ontology? If we ourselves are constructed, what does the constructing? Well, we do the constructing, obviously. Now, I mean, like, human beings and other organisms as well, or at least, I mean, that's going to be the case from most useful perspectives on the matter. I mean, one can do sort of, if you look at what, I don't know, psychologists and cognitive scientists would say about it, well, they're going to give you a particular perspective on the world, which contains human beings. Human beings come up with theories and beliefs, etc., etc. So we're doing the constructing. Anyway, if you're a constructivist, what is your ontology? I don't know if I really have an ontology, because from the constructivist point of view, what exists and what its nature is perspective dependent. So and there isn't like any objective ontology. If causal necessity isn't presupposed, how are we to account for our pragmatic considerations if they aren't lawfully organised? I'm not entirely sure what this means, because even if you deny causal necessity, there can still be laws in the sense of regularities. Right? There can still be regularities in the world, and like, why would we need more than regularities? I mean, pragmatically, right? So if the concern is pragmatic considerations, I mean, the regularity is enough, isn't it? Like you only need more than that if you care about the metaphysics. But like, I mean, the world could be, I mean, one can imagine a world, let's put it this way, one can imagine a world exactly like ours where, or maybe I should say a world where exactly the same stuff happens, but there's just no causal connections. So, I mean, you could imagine a world where, like, just by chance, just by, random quantum fluctuations or whatever, things just manifest in this way, but there's actually no causal relations between, one thing and another. And you might say, well, that's extraordinarily improbable, but like, you can imagine it, right? So the point is that in that world, I mean, the same regularities would hold. So I don't think that we really need causal necessity to account for anything pragmatic. What is your conception of evidential support relations? Are you internalist about justification? In virtue of what can something indicate truth or speak in favour of something else? Well, I'm not sure I believe that there are evidential support relations. I guess I'm inclined to internalism about justification. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with externalist accounts of knowledge and justification in principle. The problem I have is that it just sort of seems to miss the point. Like, the reason, when you get into philosophy, for me, what I'm interested in is exhibiting my reasons, right? So it's not just that I believe certain things, it's that I want to be able to give my reasons and give my justifications. Like, that felt like the point of doing philosophy when I first got into it. And so to say that, like, if somebody says, well, you can know that the external world exists, like, that you have hands just in case there's like some reliable belief forming mechanism, like just in case there are in fact hands, and then there's like some mechanism that produces a reliable connection between the hands and your beliefs, whatever. It's just like, yeah, but so what? I mean, it just seems to miss the point. I mean, look, I can say that with respect to stuff like evidential support relations, justification, and so on, I think skepticism wins the argument. I think there are a whole bunch of skeptical arguments which are incredibly powerful, and I don't know how to overcome them. And my reaction to that is, okay, seems like we just don't have justification. Or at least we don't have the kind of justification I'm interested in, which would be an internalist justification. I mean, maybe we have the externalist type of justification. I mean, maybe the world is such that there is some sort of reliable belief-forming mechanism. Like, there is an external world, and there are processes that hook us up to the world. Like, maybe, but yeah, the kind of justification I'm interested in, I don't think we have it. Okay. Forbes Beckham. What are your thoughts on Nagel's The Absurd? I've never read it. Do you think there will be another philosopher as impactful as Immanuel Kant? Why or why not? I don't really like Kant that much. So I I feel like you should have gone with Hume on this one. You should have asked, will there be another as impactful as David Hume? Because, of course, Hume is just as influential as Kant, maybe even more influential than Kant. But he's also one that I actually really, really like, and I can't imagine that there's any philosopher who's going to come along in my lifetime who's going to be as impressive as Hume. I wouldn't be surprised if the world turns for another 1,000 years and we don't get anyone as impressive as Hume. As for Kant, I think there's plenty of philosophers who are as impressive as Kant. In just that, I think there already have been. Now they may not have been as impactful, but it's pretty much impossible to know the way that sort of intellectual fashions will shift in the future. I mean, in fact, even Hume, people might lose interest in him. The philosophers that people found interesting in the most influential philosophers in like the 1800s, a lot of them have just dropped away now. I mean, like Herbert Spencer. Herbert Spencer was one of the most famous public intellectuals of his day, and there's a few people who still talk about him, but he has very little influence. I don't know if you can really predict the way these things are going to go. If you could preserve only one work of philosophy, book, essay, paper, what would it be and why? Hume's treatise. I just think that, look, it's one of my favourites. I love Hume. I love his writing. I think he's a great writer. It's just packed with it has this combination of giving, incredibly challenging arguments, skeptical challenges. Hume raises extraordinarily powerful skeptical challenges, and then he also gives a bunch of positive proposals as well. Like he has a positive program, a kind of empiricist, naturalistic account of man. And so I think it's quite fascinating. It has both the sort of destructive and constructive elements that a great philosopher will have, and they're incredibly. I think it's insightful and surprising and unexpected, some of the things he says. And so I just really like the treatise. It talks about a lot of different things, causality, induction, necessity, the self, reason. So there's all sorts of really important topics that are covered, with challenging arguments and interesting constructive proposals. I love Hume, so that's the one I would choose. Fraser Tierney, Kane, do you think political engagement is worth the time and effort? Why? Are you asking for me? For me, probably not. I'm not really that interested in politics. I think if somebody cares about it, then people should. Well, I'm not going to say they should, but I'm fine with people doing the stuff that they care about, and I do think that individuals can make differences. Like I think if you gain a platform, you can influence a significant number of people. So if you're good at like expressing, arguing for your position, then you might have an influence on things. And I guess even if you're not good at arguing for your position, it can still be nice perhaps to turn up to protests and show your support. That can be fun just in itself. There are people who enjoy the act of protesting. They enjoy, taking a stand and making their values known. And then that can also, if you go out to a particular protest for a cause, that will it will exhibit certain virtues that other people may approve of, and so I think that's worth the time and effort. You can make your values known, signal your values to other people, and maybe influence other people. So if that's something you're interested in, then do it. And why you ask? Yeah, like why? So why not? Why not? Why not do it? What have you got to lose? Frederick Hugo, what do you think about modern day idealists like Bernardo Kastrup? I have no opinion. I don't really know Bernardo Kastrup. Frozen Tomb, you said you don't believe in free will, but also don't believe in determinism. Could you elaborate on why you don't believe in free will despite not being a determinist? Also, do you plan to make a video on the topic? I don't plan to make a video on the topic. But okay, why don't I believe in free will? I think there's a few reasons. So first of all, I just find it the sort of incoherence type argument kind of just attractive. I mean, it's not something I've studied in any great detail, but yeah, it seems to make sense to me. I mean, look, it does seem to me that like the more that you fill in a story about like why somebody has done a certain thing, so like the more background I give on why somebody has done something, the less inclined you are to attribute responsibility to them, to say that it's like they're the ones who've done it. When you see somebody commit a terrible crime and you hold them responsible for it, but then you fill in details of their background life and the things that led them to the crime, that makes me inclined to lessen responsibility. So there is this feeling that like, okay, you can fill in more and more and more things, and eventually the responsibility is going to go to zero. The thing is that people are products of genes and environment, and I mean, nobody chooses their genes, nobody chooses their environment, at least not at the beginning, right? Like when you're created as a zygote, you don't choose that, and you don't choose the stuff that's going to happen to you. It just happens, right? And so I don't know. It doesn't. That's just it just seems to me like, okay, yeah. I mean, it's not really up to you what you become and what you do. The other thing is that I don't actually have any internal sense of free will. Like, I don't have the phenomenology of free will. I know that I think that I used to believe that I had that phenomenology, because obviously I in some sense have the phenomenology of like making choices, right? But here's the thing: if I attend carefully to my own mind, like if I actually really turn my attention to my own mind and I ask myself the question, like, okay, why? So there's all sorts of stuff that's going on in my head, right? There's feelings, there's thoughts, there's actions I'm performing. I can turn my attention to this stuff and I can say like, okay, why did I do this? Or I can say like, for anything that happens in my mind, I can ask like, why did that happen? Why did I do that? A thought will come into my mind, like, why did that thought happen? And the feeling that I get when I attend carefully to what's going on in my mind is that stuff just happens, and I feel like a completely passive observer. It's like I'm aware of things going on, but it's not something I have any sense of control over at all. And this is something that is very commonly reported by people who have engaged in that kind of meditation. When people actually just sort of sit down and try to clear the mind and just focus on and you just sort of focus on thoughts and feelings and ask the question like, well, why did this happen? It seems to be that one of the kind of earliest conclusions that people come to when they engage in meditation is, oh shit, I'm not responsible for anything I'm doing. I'm not in control of anything I'm doing. Stuff is just happening. And that's the feeling that I had as well. Like I turned my attention to my mind, and it just seems like stuff pops up, and there's no sense of it being like me that's causing it. So there's not really there's no phenomenology, right? There's no internal sense of free will. Finally, I think that I think the thing is with the notion of free will is that it is clearly a very kind of vague, confused concept, and any theory of free will is going to be engaging in a little bit of conceptual engineering. So whatever you say about free will, you're going to be engaging in like tidying up the concept. But if you're doing conceptual engineering, then the central question is going to be like, well, what's the point of this concept, right? What role is this concept supposed to play? Because ultimately the point of conceptual engineering is to make our concepts better. So the question is, well, what good does the concept of free will do? And I don't really see it. I don't think it does that much good. In fact, I think that assigning, control and responsibility, assigning free will to people, that it just seems to promote the worst human tendencies. You know, it makes people much more inclined towards kind of retributionist approaches to punishment, which I think are just a complete disaster. I mean, like, you know, I like my concern. What I would like to do is, you know, I don't like indulging, you know, revenge and bloodlust and all of that. I don't want to promote that. And I think the notion of free will does promote that. I I also think that, you know, it's so it like has these bad effects, and I'm not sure it really has good effects, because in many cases, you know, the most brilliant things that human beings do, the most brilliant pieces of art, and you know, the actions that human beings, maybe sometimes human beings might make sort of self-sacrificial actions and so on. When human beings do brilliant things, that seems to be clearly a case where they're like not actually thinking, they're not actually in control. Like as an artist, like making a brilliant artwork, you get into a sort of flow state where you're just not thinking anymore. You're just kind of carried along by the waves of reality, and you just go wherever it goes. So, you know, this notion of free will just doesn't seem to be that important. It seems to promote very bad human tendencies, and it's just, I think, so much easier, and yeah, it's so much more relieving to just think of people as just things that happen, like rocks falling down hills. Just sit back and let the, you know, rocks fall where they may. I mean, like, well, don't just let the rocks fall where they may. I mean, but like, don't be assigning blame and responsibility. I hope that makes sense. That's what I think about free will. Do you think egoism appeals mostly to autistic people? I've no idea. I have no idea at all. I guess maybe that makes sense. I think autistic people tend to be, they tend to have difficulty with empathy and theory of mind, and that might kind of make them, do I want to say more self-interested? I mean, that seems a bit, that's not really the point, right? But it's, yeah, you know, I think that like moral, you know, a lot of moral theories are built on like social cooperation and social sentiments, which maybe autistic people have difficulties with. So maybe that makes egoism more appealing. But, you know, look, I really don't know. What do you think about Sioran and Philip Mainlander? I don't even know who they are, so I have no opinion. Glaucon Wrongs, have you been searching for employment in academia? If so, have you found any viable placements? If you are still searching, are you looking into institutions outside the UK and North America? Are there any other professions you have an interest in pursuing? The answer to those questions is no. I'm no longer searching for employment in academia. I think that's a totally lost cause. I have absolutely no idea what to do with my life. I'm really completely fucked, actually. What is the most worthless subfield of philosophy that comes to mind, and why is it mathematical logic? I don't know, dude. I like mathematical logic. I don't really know mathematics very well. It's not one of my skills. But, you know, here's the thing with formal logical systems is that, first of all, they actually have like a lot of practical utility elsewhere. I mean, you know, so it's kind of strange to pick on this particular subfield of philosophy as being worthless, because I mean, this is one that like loads of people outside of philosophy care about. I mean, there's loads of different applications of formal logical systems. You know, so like in computer science, for instance, in constructing scientific theories. I mean, you know, there's all sorts of things you can do with formal logical systems, and of course in philosophy as well, right? Like you can apply them to philosophy. The other thing is that I've always seen formal logic as like these systems to me are like little bits of art, right? Like when I read something like Graham Priest's Introduction to Non-Classical Logics, and you explore the different properties of these formal systems, I have the feeling that I have when I have the same sort of feeling I have that I get the same sort of feeling that I get when I engage with artworks, right? Like particularly sort of you know, minimalist artworks. You know, I mean, it's the same sort of feeling as engaging with something like, you know, Steve Reich's Music for 18 Musicians or something like that. So I don't like. I both think they have practical utility and they have a kind of aesthetic value. Like they're just lovely little things. I mean, just in themselves. So I really can't agree with you that mathematical logic is the most worthless. I suppose my official position should be analytic metaphysics, because of course I'm supposed to be an empiricist. But the thing is, I actually really enjoy analytic metaphysics. I like engaging with it, and in many ways, if we didn't have analytic metaphysics, then I wouldn't have anything to oppose, would I? I mean, I wouldn't have anybody to... like, who would I be arguing against? So analytic metaphysics is worthwhile to me. Maybe something like ethics. I mean, at the end of the day, I don't like telling other people what to do, and I don't like people who do like telling other people what to do. So, but, I mean, even ethics isn't, like, ethics sometimes annoys me, or I think it's gross, but, like, it doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't quite seem right to say that it's worthless. I think that my honest answer here, and this is probably going to be a very surprising choice, I think my honest answer is a lot of the work that takes place in the philosophy of science in practice. So there's a certain approach to philosophy of science, like philosophers of science. I mean, this I think is kind of in fashion at the moment. Philosophers of science have moved away from dealing with these broad questions about, like, what is scientific method, what is the nature of scientific progress, what is realism versus anti-realism. Like, we've moved away from those, and a lot of philosophers of science now focus on, like, getting into the nitty-gritty details about specific instruments, specific research groups, specific theoretical developments. I honestly look at this stuff, and to me, a lot of it just looks like kind of science journalism, but it's not science journalism, It's not science journalism for the public. It's like science journalism, but for it's just like directed specifically at like a small crowd of academics. And I can't help but think, like, who's going to care about this stuff in, 10 years? I mean, philosophy of science in practice, I feel is, I'm not so sure about that. I actually, and with those people, I often feel like I don't really know how to talk about that, how to talk to them, because their line tends to be that the sort of debates I'm interested in, like the realism, anti-realism debate, are just not that important. And so it's not like they're proposing views that I really strongly disagree with, and I can like get in, I can get something out of the engagement. It just seems like. What they're doing is, it's like, okay, you're clearly very clever, your stuff very well, but I just don't know what the point is of doing this. There are certain philosophers where it seems like, I don't know why they didn't just either become scientists or just become science journalists. Okay, what is one of your least favourite movies that everyone seems to enjoy and you cannot understand why anyone enjoys it? I thought that Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was awful. I thought it was I'm actually quite a big fan of Quentin Tarantino's other work. I really love a lot of his movies, and I was really excited to see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I thought it was terrible. It's a movie that, as far as I can tell, is about, what is it, like 2.5 hours of an incredibly rich, wealthy, famous man moping around because he's not quite as famous as he once was. It's mainly him. It's mainly him moping around, and then we get to see, we get to see Sharon Tate, hang out at parties, and we get to see Sharon Tate go to the cinema, and we get to see Sharon Tate walking down a street. And then we get to watch Brad Pitt feeding his dog for like 5 minutes. It's just awful. And I don't know what people see in it. I don't think it has... It doesn't have interesting characters. The plot is meandering and flabby. In fact, it's worse. It's not just that it doesn't have interesting characters. The characters are horrible. They're not people who inspire any sort of, sympathy or empathy from me. I hated that movie. So there you go, that one. Godless Girl. In your epistemic penis video, you said about Moore's hand thing that because it strikes you as more plausible that you have hands versus skeptical scenarios being the case, that seems like a baseless claim. What is the argument for that? Well, first of all, I should say, I mean, this thing about it, striking me as more plausible that I have hands, that's not my view. It doesn't strike me as more plausible that I have hands. I mean, in there, I was expressing the Morean argument, right? And the Morean view, I think, is going to be that, well, there isn't really an argument for the claim that, like, it's more plausible that you have hands. So the thought is, look, we have to start somewhere, right? I mean, the skeptic has given an argument to the effect that, let's say, I don't know that I have hands, so I don't know that the external world, whether or not there's an external world, so I don't know that I have hands. And the skeptic is going to use various premises to do that. And so there's a whole bunch of different skeptical arguments. One skeptical argument might be, you don't know whether or not you're a brain in a vat. Or rather, you don't know that you're not a brain in a vat. If you don't know you're not a brain in a vat, you don't know that you have hands, so you don't know you have hands, right? So there's a skeptical argument, and Moore's point is, well, look, the most that the skeptic is going to do is offer up some premises, right? But now the problem is that there's a premise which contradicts her premises, which is more plausible than her premises, and that premise is, here is a hand, right? So here is a hand is more plausible than any skeptical premise, any philosophical premise that the skeptic might use in an argument to the effect that there are no hands. So obviously, then you should favour that premise. You should favour the premise that here, like, we have hands, or like, I know there are hands. So we don't like argue for that premise. That's the premise that we start with, and we start with that premise because it's more plausible than her premises. Now, look, I don't actually agree with that. I think that I don't know how to evaluate the relative plausibility of here is a hand versus a whole bunch of skeptical premises. I think that the brain in a vat argument, for instance, so like, I don't know that I'm not a brain in a vat. If I don't know I'm not a brain in a vat, I don't know I have hands, so I don't know I have hands. I think the premises to that argument are just as plausible as the premise that here is a hand. But yeah, I mean, I'm just explaining Moore's argument in that video. I might have misunderstood your point, in which case I apologise. But in a sense, I suppose the claim is baseless because it's like that's the claim that we start with, right? Like that's kind of the point. Like you start with the proposition that you have hands. And the reason why you start with that proposition is because it's more plausible than the propositions that the skeptic is offering. Gordo Sara, what is your favourite time to go to bed? Probably about 7 a.m. 6 or 7 a.m. I stay awake all night, go to bed at about 7 a.m. Gottfried Leibniz, what is the best argument for global relativism? I don't think that there really is. I couldn't give like a single argument for it where I would be like, okay, this is the argument. I mean, maybe I don't know. Maybe if there was a single, maybe the argument would be like the failure of absolutism. I can't really make much sense of absolutism, to be honest. I think that it's very puzzling to me what it could even mean for truth not to be relative, actually. I think relativism has so yeah, I mean, like there's that initial attraction because actually I just find absolutism kind of puzzling, and then there's various considerations that speak in favor of relativism. Constructivism about kinds I think is going to get you to a pretty substantive relativist position. I have videos on that, and the lack of independent access to the world, also the fact that I think that all standard theories of truth are most naturally interpreted in relativist terms. Like I think if you look at correspondence theory and coherence theory and pragmatist theories of truth, like if you take all of these standard theories of truth and just I wouldn't say that they necessarily commit you to relativism, but I actually do think that the sort of easiest, most natural way to take these theories is just going to commit you to relativism about truth. And that's actually something I'm hoping to do a video on that at some point soon. Yeah, I don't really have a single argument for relativism. I have a sense that I think the arguments against relativism are very poor. I think absolutism is kind of just puzzling and confusing, and I think that then there's considerations which speak in favour of relativism, and then that's what pushes me to endorse relativism. So I'm sorry, that's probably not a very satisfying answer to that question, but that's the honest answer. Okay, what is a woman? Well, actually, I've answered this already. See my response to Desnir. Hadi Saleh, what are your thoughts on continental philosophy and what do you think distinguishes it from analytic philosophy? I have no thoughts on continental philosophy. I haven't studied continental philosophy. I really don't know anything about it, so I can't talk about it. I have a suspicion that the distinction between analytic and continental philosophy is these days, I think it's probably largely stylistic. And the reason is that, as far as I can tell, analytic philosophy isn't really even a unified field anymore. I think there was a time when it probably, when it was, and that was, in the early 1900s when the analytic tradition first got going. There was an agreement that there was just this sort of general consensus that philosophy was concerned with the analysis of language, and there were different ways to elaborate what that might involve. So you had the kind of ideal language philosophy of people like Russell and the logical positivists. You had ordinary language philosophy, but the focus was on analysis of language. Linguistic problems became central, and I think that the thing is that since the 1960s, sort of 50s, 60s. There has been just an opening up of what analytic philosophy is capable of, let's say. There was the resurgence in metaphysics. There was more interest in kind of historicist approaches. So resurgence in metaphysics was due to people like Quine and Kripke. Historicist approaches, that was due to developments in philosophy of science from people like Thomas Kuhn. And then, philosophers more recently, and also like ethics and political philosophy started to grow. And then more recently, you have philosophers who are focusing more on contemporary political problems, and they're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of it. They're not just dealing with abstract theories, but they're dealing with, people's actual experiences, and they're engaging with empirical research and so on. And it just, I don't know, it doesn't feel to me like there's any kind of unifying goal of analytic philosophy anymore. And I don't think there really has been, quite frankly, for, at least 50, 60, maybe 70 years. So, very hard to say what distinguishes analytic philosophy from other types of philosophy beyond just the style in which it is done and the sort of formal tools that it uses. Have you engaged with French postmodern philosophy at any point? I felt like it would have been more relevant to you since you do philosophy of science. Well, I don't think that French postmodern philosophy has had much influence on contemporary philosophy of science, at least not in the tradition that I have been taught in. Let me clarify that. Obviously, so yeah, I know that there have been postmodern philosophers. I think Bruno Latour was French, wasn't he? I guess Michel Foucault, Michael Foucault, I don't really know how the names are pronounced. So look, there has been some influence, yes, but not a great deal, to be honest. And so, no, I haven't really engaged with much of it. Hamid Shah, why are you not a Muslim? Do you know about Tawheed? Why? Why would I be a Muslim? This seems like a belief system which just, self-evidently has got absolutely nothing going for it. Just absolutely nothing. Just seems like the metaphysics, that it's like metaphysical framework is completely nonsensical. it's the kind of moral values that it promotes are utterly repugnant. It seems to promote, dogmatism and kind of mob mentality. Many religions do. I'm not, incidentally, I want to be clear, I'm not picking on Islam here. I would say the same thing about most other religions as well. But yeah, I just don't. And also, like, it has no. I mean, what relevance does this have to me? I'm in the UK. I was born in the UK, and like, I don't know. Like, I don't think I even knew any Muslims until I was like 18 years old. Right? Like, I have no. It's not even part of like my tradition. Yeah. Like, why would I be a Muslim? Like, what one reason is there for me to even consider this? Hans, Nietzsche would be for Putin or for Ukraine? I don't know. I mean, I don't really know Nietzsche. I suspect that he would probably have objections to both of them. Because Nietzsche was kind of an individualist. I think I know enough about Nietzsche to say that at least. And I think he was. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine him like coming out like in favor of either Putin or Ukraine. Again, though, I really don't know Nietzsche. But yeah. What is a woman? I've answered this question already. See my response to Des Near. Favorite song? John Cage's 433.